Rich bride kicks out the cleaning lady until the groom reveals the woman who saved his life. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. You're fired. The words sliced through the marble and crystal atmosphere of Bella Thorne's penthouse like a blade through silk. Martha Robinson's weathered hands froze on the baccarat crystal she'd been carefully polishing, the afternoon sunlight from the floor-to-ceiling windows catching the tremor that ran through her fingers. "Mom?" Martha's voice was barely above a whisper, her Puerto Rican accent soft but unmistakable. She'd been cleaning these Back Bay penthouses for 15 years, but something in Isabella Thorne's ice-blue eyes made her stomach clench with sudden fear. Bella stood in the center of her living room like a general surveying a battlefield, her Saint Laurent blazer pristine, her blonde hair swept into a chignon so perfect it might have been carved from marble. The penthouse around her was a testament to calculated perfection. Every Hermes throw pillow positioned just so, every fresh white orchid placed with mathematical precision, every surface gleaming like the pages of Architectural Digest. "I said you're fired." Bella's voice carried the kind of controlled fury that came from years of corporate boardrooms and hostile takeovers. "Boston Premier Cleaners will be hearing from me within the hour." Martha set down the crystal with shaking hands, her brown eyes wide with confusion and growing panic. "Mrs. Thorne, I don't understand. Have I done something wrong?" "You're breathing on my Waterford crystal." The words came out clipped, each syllable sharp enough to cut glass. "You're dripping sweat onto my Persian rug." Bella's gaze raked over Martha's uniform, the same navy blue polo and khakis that every Boston Premier employee wore with unconcealed disdain. "You're exactly the kind of person who doesn't belong in a home like this." The truth was uglier than Bella's perfectly applied MAC lipstick would ever admit. The truth was that Martha Robinson had done nothing wrong except exist in Bella's line of sight on the worst possible day. 2 hours before the caterers arrived for her engagement party, 3 days before the final meeting with the wedding planner, and exactly 6 years after Bella had clawed her way out of her family's middle-class mediocrity in Medford to claim her place among Boston's elite. The truth was that seeing Martha's calloused hands touching her precious crystal had triggered something primal and ugly in Bella's chest. A wave of panic that whispered, "They'll see her and remember where you really came from." Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with the dignity of a woman who'd survived worse humiliations than this. "Mrs. Thorne, please. I have 3 grandchildren I help support. I need this job. That's not my problem." Bella turned away, her Louboutin heels clicking against the imported Italian marble. "Collect your things and leave. I'll be calling your supervisor to ensure you're removed from all the buildings my friends live in as well." The silence that followed was deafening. Martha stood frozen for a moment, her weathered face crumpling as the full weight of Bella's threat sank in. In Boston's interconnected network of luxury buildings, a word from someone like Isabella Thorne could destroy a cleaning lady's entire livelihood. "Please," Martha whispered, "I'll be more careful. You'll leave. Now." Bella's voice cracked like a whip, and something vicious and small in her chest felt satisfied when Martha flinched. From her position by the kitchen island, Bella's sister Chloe looked up from her iPad, her 23-year-old face twisted with discomfort. "Bella, maybe you should—" "Stay out of this, Chloe." Bella's warning was unmistakable. "This is my home, and I decide who's welcome here." Martha slowly gathered her cleaning supplies, her movements careful and deliberate despite the way her hands shook. She packed each bottle of polish, each microfiber cloth, with the methodical precision of someone trying to maintain dignity in the face of humiliation. Mrs. Thorne, Martha said quietly, not looking up from her supply caddy. I hope someday you learn the difference between having class and showing it. The words hit Bella like a physical blow. For just a moment, her perfect composure cracked, and something raw and wounded flashed across her face. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by an even icier fury. "Get out!" Bella hissed. "Before I call security." Martha Robinson walked toward the private elevator with her head held high, her dignity intact despite everything. She pressed the call button with a steady hand, and when the doors opened with their soft, expensive chime, she stepped inside without looking back. As the elevator doors closed, Bella caught her reflection in their polished surface. Blonde hair perfect, makeup flawless, blazer immaculate. Everything exactly as it should be. So why did she look like she was about to shatter? "Jesus, Bella!" Chloe's voice cut through the silence, like an accusation. "What the hell was that about?" Bella spun around, her eyes blazing. "That was about maintaining standards. Something you might understand when you're actually paying for your own life instead of living off trust fund money." The cruelty in her own voice shocked her, but she couldn't seem to stop the words from pouring out. The engagement party was in 2 hours. The society photographer would be here any minute. Everything had to be perfect, absolutely perfect, because perfect was the only thing standing between Isabella Thorne and the terrifying possibility that someone might see through her carefully constructed facade. Chloe stared at her sister like she was looking at a stranger. "Since when do you care about a cleaning lady breathing on your precious crystal? You used to clean houses yourself, remember? Before the MBA, before the venture capital job, before you decided you were too good for—" "I was never too good for anything," Bella snapped. But her voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there moments before. "I worked for everything I have. Everything, and I won't apologize for protecting it." The penthouse fell silent, except for the soft hum of the climate control system and the distant sounds of Boston traffic 40 floors below. Chloe gathered her things without another word, her disappointment hanging in the air like expensive perfume. "Alex is going to ask about this," Chloe said quietly as she headed for the door. "He always asks about the staff. He remembers their names. Alex doesn't need to know." Bella's voice was steady again, controlled. "There's nothing to tell." But as Chloe left, and Bella stood alone in her perfect penthouse, surrounded by her perfect things, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just broken something far more valuable than any piece of Waterford crystal. Something that might be impossible to repair. 2 hours later, Isabella Thorne's penthouse had been transformed into a vision from the pages of Town and Country magazine. Crystal champagne flutes caught the late afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Boston Common. White orchids and roses, flown in from Ecuador that morning, created elegant arrangements throughout the living space. The caterers from L'Espalier moved like ghosts in black uniforms, their footsteps silent on the Persian rugs that had cost more than most people's cars. Bella stood at her bedroom's full-length mirror, applying the final touches of her makeup with the precision of a surgeon. Her reflection showed exactly what she'd worked 6 years to become. A woman who belonged in this world of old money and older names. The Vera Wang cocktail dress in midnight blue hugged her gym-toned figure perfectly. Her grandmother's diamond earrings, the only valuable thing her family had ever owned, caught the light like stars. "Perfection," she whispered to her reflection, but the word felt hollow in her mouth. The memory of Martha Robinson's weathered face kept intruding on her careful preparation ritual, the way the older woman's hands had shaken as she packed her cleaning supplies, the quiet dignity in her voice when she'd spoken about class versus showing it. Bella shook her head, dispelling the unwelcome thoughts. Martha Robinson was a problem she'd solved. The engagement party would be flawless, just like everything else in her carefully curated life. The elevator chimed, and Bella heard Alexander Sterling's voice drifting through the penthouse. Her heart did that familiar skip it had been doing for the past 2 years whenever she heard his laugh. Rich, genuine, completely without artifice. Alex was everything she'd dreamed of when she'd first stepped into the gleaming offices of Beacon Hill Capital, fresh out of Harvard Business School. Old Boston money, a trust fund older than the Constitution, and a face that belonged on the cover of GQ. But more than that, he was kind, genuinely, uncomplicatedly kind in a way that sometimes made Bella feel like she was standing too close to the sun. "Bella," his voice carried down the hallway. "The place looks incredible. Where's my beautiful fiancé?" She emerged from the bedroom to find him standing in the living room, and her breath caught the way it always did. Alexander Sterling, at 33, was 6 feet of lean muscle and easy confidence, his dark hair slightly mussed from the October wind, his brown eyes warm with affection. He wore his Armani suit like it was jeans and a t-shirt, wealth so old and established it didn't need to announce itself. "There she is." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands finding her waist as he pulled her close. "You look absolutely stunning." The kiss he gave her was soft, reverent, and it made something tight in Bella's chest loosen slightly. This was why she'd fought so hard to build this life, this moment, this man, this feeling of being cherished by someone who could have chosen anyone. "How was the board meeting?" she asked, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from his lapel. "Productive. We approved funding for 3 new community development projects in Roxbury and Dorchester." His eyes lit up with the passion that had first drawn her to him. "There's this amazing woman running a literacy program. She's transforming lives with nothing but determination and heart." Something cold twisted in Bella's stomach. "Community development in Dorchester? Alex, you know how I feel about—" "I know you think it's throwing money away," he interrupted gently, "but some investments can't be measured in quarterly returns. Sometimes you invest in people because it's the right thing to do." Before Bella could respond, the elevator chimed again, and the first wave of guests began arriving. Soon the penthouse filled with the cream of Boston society. Venture capitalists and art dealers, museum board members, and old money wives whose families had arrived on the Mayflower. Bella moved through the crowd like she'd been born to it, air-kissing cheeks and making the kind of small talk that revealed nothing while sounding deeply intimate. "Isabella, darling," purred Victoria Ashworth, whose husband owned half of Beacon Hill, "that Vera Wang is absolutely divine. You must tell me where you found those earrings." "They were my grandmother's," Bella replied smoothly, not mentioning that her grandmother had been a seamstress in Medford who'd saved for 2 years to buy them second-hand. "Family pieces are always the most precious," Victoria agreed, though her eyes suggested she was calculating their worth. "Tell me, have you finalized the venue for the wedding? I heard the most delicious rumor that you're considering the country club. We're still deciding between a few options." Bella's smile never wavered, though her grip tightened slightly on her champagne flute. The truth was, she'd been lobbying hard for the Somerset Club, the most exclusive venue in Boston, the kind of place where a wedding announcement would make the society pages of every major newspaper. Alex appeared at her elbow as if summoned, his presence immediately calming her racing pulse. "Victoria, how lovely to see you. How's Richard's golf game?" As Alex expertly fielded Victoria's attention, Bella found herself studying his profile. He navigated these social waters with such ease, but unlike her, he didn't seem to need the validation. He was kind to everyone, from the caterers refilling champagne to the society matrons calculating his net worth, with the same genuine warmth. "You're thinking very hard about something," he murmured in her ear when Victoria had moved on to her next target. Just wondering how I got so lucky, she replied, which was true enough. His arm tightened around her waist. I'm the lucky one, though I have to ask, where's Martha tonight? I was hoping to thank her for the extra work she put in for this party. Bella's blood turned to ice. Martha, the cleaning lady from Boston Premier. She's been taking care of your place for months now, right? Sweet woman. She always asks about my mother whenever she sees me in the building. The champagne flute trembled in Bella's hand. We changed cleaning services. Last minute. You know how it is with these big events. Alex's brow furrowed slightly. Really? That's strange. I just saw her supervisor last week, and he mentioned how much Martha loves working here, said she always speaks so fondly of you. The lie sat bitter on Bella's tongue, but she forced herself to smile. Well, you know how these service companies can be. Sometimes changes just happen. Before Alex could ask any more questions, Chloe appeared with Dr. James Chen, Alex's business partner in several philanthropic ventures. The conversation shifted to safer ground, upcoming charity galas and investment opportunities, but Bella couldn't shake the feeling that Alex's eyes lingered on her with something that hadn't been there before. Suspicion. As the evening wore on, Bella played her part perfectly. She laughed at the right moments, asked the right questions, and charmed potential investors with stories of her latest acquisitions. But underneath her polished exterior, panic gnawed at her like acid. Martha Robinson knew things about her, had seen her without makeup on early mornings, had been present during phone calls with her parents, had witnessed the small vulnerabilities that Bella kept hidden from everyone else. And now Martha was out there somewhere, angry and unemployed, with nothing left to lose. Penny for your thoughts. Alex's voice startled her from her spiraling anxiety. They were standing on the terrace now, the October air crisp against their skin as the last guests filtered out. Boston spread below them like a glittering jewel, all lights and possibility. Just thinking about how perfect tonight was, she lied, leaning into his warmth. It was perfect, he agreed, but something in his voice made her look up at him. Though I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about changing cleaning services at the last minute. Bella's heart hammered against her ribs. Alex, it's really not important. You fired her, didn't you? The words hung between them like a sword. Bella's mouth opened, but no sound came out. In the silence, she could hear the distant sounds of the city, the soft rush of wind through the commons trees, and the thunderous beating of her own pulse. I did what I thought was best, she finally managed. What did she do? Alex, please, it's been a long night, and what did Martha Robinson do that was so terrible you had to fire her on the spot? His voice was still gentle, but there was steel underneath it now. Bella turned away from him, gripping the terrace railing so tightly her knuckles went white. She was inappropriate, unprofessional. Martha Robinson. Alex's voice was flat now, all warmth gone. 52 years old, single mother of 2, grandmother of 3, works 60 hours a week to support her family, has never missed a day of work in 5 years. How do you... Because I make it my business to know the people who work in my life, Alex said quietly. Because I believe in treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of their job title. The accusation in his voice was unmistakable, and it hit Bella like a physical blow. This was exactly what she'd been terrified of, the moment when Alex would see through her carefully constructed facade and realize she wasn't the woman he thought he'd fallen in love with. You don't understand, she whispered. You've never had to fight for respect the way I have. You've never had to prove you belonged somewhere. So you proved it by destroying someone else's livelihood? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered and unanswerable. Below them, Boston glittered like a promise, But for the first time in 6 years, Isabella Thorne felt like she was standing on the outside looking in. The silence in the penthouse felt different after the last guest had left. Where hours earlier, there had been laughter and champagne bubbles and the warm glow of success, now there was only the soft hum of the climate control system and the weight of unspoken accusations hanging between Bella and Alex like a wall of glass. Bella moved through the space mechanically, collecting abandoned champagne flutes and straightening cushions that the caterers had already arranged perfectly. Anything to avoid looking at Alex, who stood by the windows with his hands in his pockets, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. "The Ashworth seemed pleased about the museum fundraiser," she said finally, her voice artificially bright in the thick silence. Alex didn't respond. He was studying the city lights 40 floors below with the intensity of a man trying to solve an equation that wouldn't balance. And Dr. Chen mentioned he might be interested in the renewable energy startup we're courting. Bella's words tumbled out faster now, desperation creeping into her tone. "The one with the solar panel manufacturing. I think we could get him to commit to at least a preliminary investment if—" "Bella." Her name on his lips stopped her cold. She turned to face him, and the expression on his face made her stomach clench with dread. This wasn't the Alex she'd fallen in love with, the man who looked at her like she'd hung the moon. This was someone she'd never seen before, distant, disappointed, and utterly unreadable. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "We are talking." But even as the words left her mouth, she knew how ridiculous they sounded. Alex finally turned from the window, and the look in his brown eyes made her feel like she was falling. "No, we're not. You're performing. You've been performing all evening, and I didn't realize it until now." The accusation hit her like a slap. "I don't know what you mean. The woman I fell in love with would never fire someone for breathing wrong." His voice was careful, controlled, but she could hear the hurt underneath it. "Again, the woman I fell in love with grew up in a family that struggled. She told me stories about her mother working 3 jobs to keep the lights on. She said it taught her empathy." "It did teach me empathy," Bella protested, but the words felt weak even to her own ears. "Then where was it tonight?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Bella opened her mouth to respond, but found herself speechless. How could she explain the panic that had seized her when she'd seen Martha's weathered hands on her crystal? How could she make him understand the terror that someone might see through her perfect facade and realize she was still that scared little girl from Medford who'd never felt good enough? Martha wasn't just inappropriate, Alex continued, his voice growing harder with each word. She was perfect. I've seen her work. She's meticulous, respectful, professional. Her supervisor raves about her. The other residents in this building specifically request her. How do you know all this? Bella's voice was barely above a whisper. Because after you lied to me earlier, I called Boston Premier myself. The words hit her like physical blows. I wanted to send flowers to thank her for the extra work she put in for tonight. Do you know what they told me? Bella's hands were shaking now. She clasped them behind her back, trying to hide the tremor that seemed to be spreading through her entire body. They told me Martha Robinson was terminated this afternoon, effective immediately. No explanation given, except that a client had complained about her personally. Alex took a step closer, and she could see the confusion and disappointment warring in his eyes. They also told me that you specifically requested she be blacklisted from all the buildings your friends live in. The shame was so intense, it felt like drowning. Bella had spent 6 years building this perfect life, this perfect image, and now it was crumbling around her because of one moment of cruel panic. Alex, you don't understand, then help me understand. His voice cracked slightly, and the sound of it broke something inside her chest. Well, because right now, I don't recognize the woman I'm supposed to marry in 3 months. The words landed like a physical blow. Bella sank onto the white leather sofa, her perfect posture finally cracking under the weight of her guilt and fear. "She made me remember," she whispered finally. "Remember what? Where I came from." The confession felt like pulling glass from a wound. When I saw her hands on my crystal, I could see my mother's hands, cracked and dry from cleaning other people's houses, and I panicked. Alex sat down across from her, but the distance between them felt like an ocean. "Your mother's hands." Before my father's promotion, before the move to Medford, she cleaned houses on Beacon Hill. The words came out in a rush now, like poison being expelled from a wound. The same houses where I get invited to dinner parties now, and I was terrified that someone would see Martha and remember. That they'd realize I don't really belong here. Belong where? Here! The word exploded out of her, raw and desperate. This world, this life, this perfect penthouse where everything has to be flawless because one crack, one mistake, one moment of being human, and they'll see through me. They'll realize I'm just a girl from Medford whose mother scrubbed toilets to put food on the table. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. Part pity, part confusion, part something that looked dangerously like disgust. "Do you hear yourself right now?" he asked quietly. "What?" "You just told me that you destroyed an innocent woman's livelihood because you were afraid someone might realize your mother worked for a living." His voice was steady, but there was something cold in it that made her blood freeze. "And you fired someone who reminds you of your own mother." The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. Bella doubled over on the sofa, her perfect posture finally collapsing as the weight of what she'd done crashed down on her. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That woman has 3 grandchildren she helps support." Alex continued relentlessly. "She's been working since she was 14 years old. She's never missed a day of work, never had a single complaint filed against her, and you destroyed her reputation because she made you feel ashamed of where you came from." Tears were streaming down Bella's face now, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "I didn't mean, I never wanted—" "What did you want, Bella?" Alex's voice was gentle again, but the gentleness was somehow worse than his anger. "Because the woman I fell in love with wanted to build something meaningful. She talked about using her success to help other people climb the same ladder she did. What happened to her?" "She got scared," Bella whispered. "She got so scared of losing everything that she forgot why she wanted it in the first place." Alex was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those brown eyes that had always seen too much. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful and measured. "I need some time to think about this," he said. The words hit her like a death sentence. "Alex, please, I'm going to stay at my place tonight." He stood up, straightening his jacket with the same careful precision she'd seen him use 1,000 times before. "I think we both need some space to figure out what this means. What means?" But even as she asked the question, she knew whether the woman I'm engaged to is someone I actually know, he said quietly, "and or whether she's just another performance." He walked toward the elevator without looking back, and Bella felt something inside her chest crack open like an egg. This was her worst nightmare made real. Losing the man she loved because he'd finally seen who she really was, underneath all the carefully constructed perfection. "Alex, wait!" she called out as the elevator doors opened. He paused, his hand on the doorframe, but he didn't turn around. "What can I do?" she whispered. "How do I fix this?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked back at her over his shoulder, and the sadness in his eyes was worse than any anger could have been. "I don't know if you can," he said quietly, "but if you want to try, you might start by figuring out who you are when nobody's watching. Because right now, I'm not sure you know." The elevator doors closed with a soft chime. And Isabella Thorne was alone in her perfect penthouse with nothing but the sound of her own ragged breathing and the taste of ashes in her mouth. The morning after her engagement party dawned grey and merciless, October light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Bella's penthouse like a judgment. She'd spent the night curled on her white leather sofa, still wearing her Vera Wang dress, her makeup streaked across her face in dark tracks that told the story of everything she'd lost in the space of a single conversation. Her phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m., texts from society friends thanking her for the divine party, missed calls from her parents wanting to know how everything had gone, and one message from Chloe that simply read, "Call me." But the only call that mattered, the one from Alex, never came. Bella dragged herself to the bathroom and stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, hollow-eyed, makeup smeared. The careful facade finally cracked open to reveal something raw and desperate underneath. She stripped off the cocktail dress that had cost more than Martha Robinson probably made in a month and stepped into the shower, letting the scalding water wash away the remains of her perfect evening. But no amount of expensive soap could clean away the shame that had settled in her bones like an infection. By the time she emerged, wrapped in a silk robe that cost more than most people's rent, her phone was ringing. The caller ID made her stomach clench. Beacon Hill Capital Conference Room. The partners' meeting she'd completely forgotten. 40 minutes later, Bella sat in the gleaming conference room on the 32nd floor of One Boston Place, surrounded by the most powerful venture capitalists in New England. Her hair was perfect again, her makeup flawless, her Armani suit pressed and immaculate. To anyone looking at her, she was the picture of composed professionalism. Inside, she was screaming. "The renewable energy startup looks promising," said David Morrison, the managing partner, his silver hair catching the light from the harbor view windows. "Isabella, you've been leading due diligence. What's your recommendation?" Bella blinked, realizing that she'd been staring at the presentation slides without seeing them. The numbers and projections that usually fascinated her looked like hieroglyphics through the fog of her exhaustion and guilt. The financial models are solid," she managed, grateful for years of training that let her function on autopilot. "Growth projections are conservative. Management team has relevant experience." But Morrison's sharp eyes missed nothing. "But I'd like another week to review their community impact statements," she heard herself saying. "I want to make sure we're not just funding another company that profits while leaving local communities behind." The words surprised her as much as they surprised everyone else in the room. David Morrison's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Since when do you care about community impact?" asked Patricia Wells, the partner who'd been Bella's mentor since she'd arrived at the firm. You've always focused on pure ROI, since I destroyed someone's life because I was ashamed of where I came from," Bella thought, but didn't say. "I think we have a responsibility to consider the broader implications of our investments," she said instead. The meeting continued around her, but Bella felt like she was watching it from underwater. These people had been her world for 6 years. Their approval, the oxygen she breathed. Their respect, the foundation of her identity. Now she sat among them, feeling like a fraud, wondering if Alex was right, if she'd lost herself so completely in the performance that she no longer knew who she really was. When the meeting ended, she escaped to her corner office and closed the door. The space was a monument to her success, awards on the walls, expensive art carefully chosen by a decorator, a view of Boston Harbor that reminded her every day how far she'd climbed from her humble beginnings in Medford. But instead of pride, all she felt was emptiness, Her phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Lunch? No. 9 Park, 1 p.m. We need to talk. The restaurant choice stung. No. 9 Park was where Alex had proposed 6 months ago, where they'd celebrated every anniversary since they'd started dating. Going there now felt like walking across broken glass, barefoot. But she needed to talk to someone, and Chloe was the only person who knew her well enough to cut through her carefully constructed lies. An hour later, Bella sat across from her sister in the elegant dining room that overlooked Boston Common. Chloe looked younger than her 23 years in jeans and a Boston University sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that Bella envied for its effortless authenticity. "You look like hell," Chloe said without preamble. "Thanks. You always know just what to say to make me feel better." "Cut the sarcasm, Bella. I'm serious." Chloe leaned forward, her brown eyes, so much like their father's, filled with concern. "What happened after I left last night? Alex looked like someone had kicked his dog when he got on the elevator." Bella stared at her untouched salad, her appetite non-existent. "He found out about Martha." "What about her?" "That I fired her, that I had her blacklisted from all the buildings in Back Bay." The words tasted like poison. "That I destroyed her life because she made me feel ashamed of where we came from." Chloe was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Why did you fire her, really?" "Because she was breathing on my crystal." The answer sounded even more ridiculous spoken aloud. "Bullshit." Bella looked up, startled by the vehemence in her sister's voice. "I said bullshit," Chloe repeated, her eyes flashing with an anger Bella had never seen before. "You fired her because you saw Mom in her hands, didn't you? Because she reminded you of everything you've spent 6 years trying to forget." The accuracy of the accusation was like a physical blow. "Chloe, do you remember what Mom used to say when she came home from cleaning those houses on Beacon Hill?" Chloe's voice was rising now, drawing looks from other diners. She used to say the only difference between her and the women who lived there was luck and circumstances. She said she hoped someday we'd be successful enough to help people like her, not step on them. Tears burned behind Bella's eyes. "I know. I remember." "Do you?" "Because last night I watched my sister, the woman I've looked up to my entire life, humiliate someone who could have been our mother 20 years ago." Chloe's voice cracked with disappointment. "And I didn't recognize you. I didn't recognize the person you've become." The words hit harder than any of Alex's accusations had. Bella had built her entire identity around being someone Chloe could admire, someone who proved that girls from Medford could make it in the world of Boston's elite. Now, she was faced with the possibility that her transformation had turned her into exactly the kind of person their mother had taught them to pity. "I don't know how to fix this," Bella whispered. "Start by making it right with Martha," Chloe said firmly. "Find her, apologize, get her job back. And if Alex still won't forgive me?" Chloe's expression softened slightly. "Then you'll know you did the right thing anyway." "But Bella, if you can't forgive yourself for who you've become, why should he?" The question haunted Bella for the rest of the afternoon as she sat in her office, staring at her computer screen without seeing it. She'd spent 6 years building a perfect life, and it had taken her exactly 6 minutes to destroy the foundation it was built on. But maybe destruction was what she needed. Maybe the person she'd become needed to die so that someone better could take her place. Maybe it was time to stop performing and start living. By 5 o'clock, she'd made her decision. She grabbed her coat and headed for the elevator, her hands shaking as she pulled up the address she'd found in the Boston Premier Cleaners employee directory. It was time to face Martha Robinson. It was time to face the truth about who Isabella Thorne really was, underneath all the designer clothes and carefully constructed perfection. It was time to remember where she'd come from, and decide who she wanted to become. The address led her to a narrow street in Dorchester, where triple-decker houses stood shoulder to shoulder like soldiers holding their ground against gentrification. Bella's BMW felt absurdly out of place among the older sedans and pickup trucks lining the street, her gleaming silver paint job catching the late afternoon sun like a spotlight announcing her presence as an outsider. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. This was the furthest she'd been from Back Bay in months, and every instinct she'd developed over the past 6 years was screaming at her to turn around and drive home to her safe, perfect penthouse. But Alex's words echoed in her mind. Figure out who you are when nobody's watching. The truth was, she wasn't sure she'd ever really known. Martha Robinson's house was a blue triple-decker with white trim, its small front yard carefully maintained despite the chain-link fence and the reality of urban living pressing in from all sides. Children's voices drifted from somewhere nearby, and the smell of cooking, something rich and spicy that reminded Bella unexpectedly of her grandmother's kitchen, wafted from an open window. Bella climbed the front steps on legs that felt like water, her designer heels clicking against the concrete with sounds that seemed to announce her foreignness to the entire neighborhood. The doorbell was old, the kind that actually rang instead of chiming electronically, and its harsh sound made her jump. Footsteps approached from inside the house, and then the door opened to reveal Martha Robinson. The older woman looked smaller here than she had in Bella's penthouse, wearing jeans and a faded Red Sox t-shirt instead of her cleaning uniform. But her eyes, those gentle brown eyes that had haunted Bella's dreams, held the same dignity they'd shown yesterday, even in the face of public humiliation. Mrs. Thorne. Martha's voice was carefully neutral, but Bella could see the confusion and wariness in her expression. This is unexpected. Martha, Bella's carefully rehearsed speech disappeared from her mind, leaving her standing on the doorstep like a supplicant. May I come in, please? Martha studied her for a long moment, and Bella found herself holding her breath. She wouldn't have blamed the other woman for slamming the door in her face. She probably deserved it. I suppose, Martha said finally, stepping aside to let her enter. The inside of the house was nothing like Bella's penthouse and everything like the home she'd grown up in before her father's promotion. Hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of use, furniture that was well maintained but clearly second-hand, family photos covering every available surface. The scent of something delicious cooking filled the air, and somewhere in the back of the house, a television played softly. Mike, can I get you some coffee? Martha asked, her ingrained hospitality overriding any personal feelings about her unexpected visitor. Please. Bella perched on the edge of a well-worn sofa, feeling like she might bolt at any moment. Martha disappeared into the kitchen, and Bella found herself studying the photographs that covered the mantelpiece. 3 children at various ages, all with Martha's gentle eyes. School pictures and graduation photos, birthday parties and family vacations that had clearly been saved for years to afford. My grandchildren, Martha said, returning with 2 mugs of coffee that smelled like heaven. Isabel is 14, Marcus is 12, and little Elena just turned 9. The coffee was strong and perfect, served in mugs that didn't match, but somehow felt more real than all of Bella's expensive Baccarat crystal. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of yesterday's confrontation hanging between them like a wall. I owe you an apology, Bella said finally, the words scraping against her throat like broken glass. Yes, Martha said simply. You do. The lack of social cushioning, no polite protests or reassurances, was startling. In Bella's world, apologies were wrapped in layers of diplomatic language that softened their edges. Martha's directness was like a slap of cold air. "I was wrong," Bella continued, forcing herself to meet Martha's steady gaze. "Completely, inexcusably wrong. You did nothing to deserve what I did to you, and I'm—" Her voice cracked, surprising them both. "I'm ashamed of who I was yesterday." "Who you were?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "Or who you are?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Bella stared into her coffee, watching the steam rise and disappear, and tried to find an answer that wasn't another lie. "I don't know anymore," she whispered. "I thought I did. I thought I'd built something solid, something worth having. But yesterday, when I saw you in my home, I panicked. You reminded me of things I've spent years trying to forget, and I lashed out because I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of being found out." The confession felt like pulling thorns from her chest. "Of someone realizing that I don't really belong in that world. That underneath all the designer clothes and perfect penthouse, I'm still just a girl from Medford whose mother cleaned houses to keep the lights on." Martha was quiet for a long time, sipping her coffee and studying Bella with those too perceptive eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but unflinching. "Oh, you think that world you've built is real? What do you mean? That penthouse, those parties, all those people treating you like you're special because you have money. You think that's more real than where you came from?" Bella opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Put that way, her entire life sounded like an elaborate costume party. "My daughter worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school," Martha continued. "My son-in-law drives a truck 60 hours a week to support his family. My grandchildren study at this kitchen table every night because they know education is the only way to build something better. That's real, Mrs. Thorne. People fighting for their families, working for their dreams, building something with their hands and their hearts. That's real." "I know," Bella whispered. "And I used to know that. Then what happened to you?" The question was asked without judgment, but it hit Bella like a physical blow. What had happened to her? When had she stopped seeing the value in struggle and started seeing only the value in appearance? "I got tired of being looked down on," she said finally. "I got tired of people assuming I was less than them because of my address or my parents' jobs or the fact that I shopped at Target instead of Nordstrom. So I decided to beat them at their own game. And did you?" Bella thought about her penthouse, her corner office, her engagement to Alexander Sterling, all the external markers of success she'd accumulated like armor. "I thought I had, but you didn't feel like you had." It wasn't a question, and the accuracy of it took Bella's breath away. Because Martha was right. Despite everything she'd achieved, she'd never stopped feeling like that insecure girl from Medford, always one mistake away from being exposed as a fraud. "No," Bella admitted. "I never felt like I belonged there. I just got better at pretending. And yesterday, when you saw me in your perfect home, you were afraid I'd give away the game." "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. Martha set down her coffee cup and leaned forward, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "Can I tell you something, Mrs. Thorne? Please, and call me Bella." "Bella?" Martha's voice warmed slightly around her name. "In 15 years of cleaning houses in Back Bay and Beacon Hill, I've seen a lot of women like you, women who've climbed so high they've forgotten where they started. And you know what I've learned?" Bella shook her head. "And the ones who are truly confident in who they are, they don't treat people like me badly. They don't need to. It's only the ones who are still scared, still fighting ghosts from their past, who feel the need to prove they're better than someone else." The observation was so accurate, it felt like surgery without anesthesia. Bella doubled over slightly, the truth of it cutting through every defense she'd built around herself. "The women who belong in that world," Martha continued gently, "they know that dignity isn't about what you own or where you live. It's about how you treat people when you have power over them. Like Alex, Bella said quietly. Yes, like Mr. Sterling. Martha's expression softened. He's a good man, Bella. I've known him for 2 years, and I've never seen him treat anyone with anything but kindness. How do you know Alex? The question had been bothering her since yesterday. Martha was quiet for a moment, her eyes growing distant with memory. That's not my story to tell, she said finally, but I will say this. He's the kind of man who sees people for who they really are, not what they pretend to be. If he loves you, it's because he sees something in you worth loving. I don't think he loves me anymore, Bella whispered. I think yesterday showed him who I really am, and he doesn't like what he saw. Maybe it showed him who you've been pretending to be, Martha said gently. Maybe it's time to show him who you really are underneath all that fear. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of Martha's words settling between them like seeds in fertile ground. Outside, children played in the street, their laughter drifting through the windows and mixing with the domestic sounds of families preparing for evening. I called Boston Premier this morning, Bella said finally. I told them there had been a misunderstanding, that I wanted you back immediately with a formal apology and compensation for the day's wages you lost. Martha raised an eyebrow. And then what did they say? They said you'd already been reassigned to another building, that you'd specifically requested not to work in Back Bay anymore. I did. The simple admission hurt more than Bella had expected. I don't blame you. But Martha, I am sorry, truly deeply sorry, not because Alex found out, not because it threatened my perfect life, but because I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Because I became someone I was raised never to be. Martha studied her for a long moment, those gentle eyes seeing too much. Apology accepted, she said finally. But Bella, sorry isn't enough anymore. If you want to make this right, really right, you need to figure out who you want to be going forward. Because the woman who fired me yesterday, she's not someone I'd want as a friend, but the woman sitting in my living room right now, drinking coffee and telling the truth. She might be. As Bella drove back toward Back Bay through the gathering dusk, Martha's words echoed in her mind like a prayer. She'd spent 6 years building a perfect life, but perfection, she was beginning to realize, was just another word for prison. Maybe it was time to build something real instead. Maybe it was time to remember that the girl from Medford had been pretty amazing before she decided she needed to be someone else. Maybe it was time to call Alex and tell him the truth, all of it. Her phone buzzed with a text as she pulled into her building's parking garage. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Public Garden. Alex Bella stared at the message, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the moment when she'd find out if the man she loved could forgive her for who she'd become, or if she'd lost him forever because she'd forgotten who she'd always been underneath. The Public Garden at 2 o'clock on a crisp October afternoon was postcard perfect. Golden leaves drifting down from ancient elms, the swan boats gliding across the lagoon carrying the last tourists of the season, and couples walking hand in hand along paths that had witnessed countless proposals, breakups, and reconciliations over the decades. Bella arrived 15 minutes early, her stomach twisted into knots that had nothing to do with the iced coffee she'd been unable to finish. She'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on jeans and a simple cashmere sweater, an attempt to look approachable rather than intimidating, real rather than performed. She found Alex sitting on a bench near the make-way for duckling statues, his dark hair catching the afternoon light as he watched a group of children climb on the bronze sculptures. He looked tired, she realized with a pang of guilt. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from a sleepless night spent questioning everything you thought you knew about someone you loved. Hi, she said softly, approaching the bench like she might a wounded animal. And I... He looked up at her, and the careful distance in his brown eyes made her chest ache. "Thanks for coming." She sat down beside him, maintaining the space he seemed to need, and for a moment they simply watched the children play. A little girl with pigtails was trying to climb onto one of the larger ducklings, while her mother called out warnings about being careful. I went to see Martha yesterday," Bella said finally, the words coming out in a rush before she lost her nerve. Alex's head turned sharply toward her. "You did what?" "I drove to Dorchester, to her house. I apologized." Bella's hands were shaking in her lap, so she clasped them together tightly. "I tried to get her job back, but she'd already requested a transfer away from Back Bay. Bella." Alex's voice was complicated, carrying surprise and something that might have been hope. "I know it doesn't fix what I did," she continued quickly. "I know saying sorry doesn't undo the fact that I humiliated her and tried to destroy her livelihood because I was ashamed of where I came from. But I needed her to know that I recognize how wrong I was." Alex was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. A swan boat drifted past them on the lagoon, its passengers bundled in jackets and scarves, laughing at something the boat operator had said. "What did she say to you?" he asked finally. "She called me out." Bella's voice was barely above a whisper. "She made me look at who I've become, and I didn't like what I saw. She asked me when I'd stopped believing that struggle and hard work were real and started thinking that money and status were the only things that mattered." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth, that I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way I stopped being proud of where I came from and started being ashamed of it instead." Bella turned to face him fully, and the pain in her eyes was raw and unguarded. "Alex, I've spent 6 years building this perfect life, but I've been miserable almost every day of it, not because I don't love my job or appreciate what I have, but because I've been so terrified of losing it all that I forgot how to actually live." Alex studied her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked me to figure out who I am when nobody's watching." The words came out stronger now, fueled by a desperation that felt like drowning. "And the truth is, I don't know. I've been performing for so long that I'm not sure where the act ends and the real me begins. But I want to find out. I want to remember who I was before I decided she wasn't good enough. Bella, I know you might not be able to forgive me," she rushed on. "I know that what I did to Martha might have shown you something about my character that you can't unsee. But if there's any chance at all, that you still believe there's something worth saving in me, then I'm asking you to help me find it." The vulnerability in her voice seemed to crack something open in Alex's chest. He turned on the bench to face her fully, and for the first time since the engagement party, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't disappointment or anger. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "What happened with Martha, it wasn't just about her. It was about what it showed me about the woman I'm supposed to marry." Bella's heart clenched, but she forced herself to listen. "And I fell in love with someone who told me stories about her mother working 3 jobs and being proud of her. Someone who said she wanted to use her success to help other people climb the same ladder she did. And somewhere along the way, that person disappeared." "She didn't disappear," Bella said desperately. "She just got buried under 6 years of fear and insecurity and pretending to be someone she thought she needed to be. Then help me find her again." The words hung between them like a lifeline thrown across a chasm. Bella felt tears spring to her eyes, not the careful, controlled tears of someone trying to manipulate a situation, but the raw, grateful tears of someone who'd been offered an undeserved second chance. "How?" she whispered. Alex was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the children playing on the bronze ducklings. "Martha runs a community center in Dorchester," he said finally. a place that provides after-school programs and literacy classes for kids whose parents work multiple jobs. She's been trying to expand their services, but they need funding and volunteers. Bella's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Alex, what are you saying? I'm saying that if you want to remember who you were before you decided she wasn't good enough, maybe you should start by helping the kind of people you used to be. The suggestion hit her like a physical blow, not because it was cruel, but because it was perfect, terrifying and humbling, and exactly what she needed to do, even though every instinct she'd developed over the past 6 years was screaming at her to run. You want me to volunteer at Martha's community center, she said slowly. I want you to figure out who Isabella Thorne is when she's not trying to impress anyone, Alex replied. I want you to remember what it feels like to help someone without getting anything in return, except the knowledge that you made their life a little better. And if I do this, if I try to become the person you fell in love with again, where does that leave us? Alex reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and familiar against hers. I don't know, he said honestly, but I love you enough to find out. The admission broke something open in Bella's chest, not the desperate, clinging love of someone afraid of being abandoned, but the quiet, steady love of someone willing to do the hard work of becoming worthy of being loved in return. I'm scared, she whispered. Good, Alex said gently. Being scared means you're about to do something that matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon light filter through the golden leaves and listening to the sounds of the city moving around them. Bella felt something shifting inside her chest, not the brittle confidence she'd worn like armor for 6 years, but something softer and more real. There's something else, Alex said eventually, his voice careful and measured. Do what? About Martha, about how I know her. He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. I wasn't completely honest with you before. What do you mean? Alex was quiet for a long moment, his hand still holding hers, but his gaze distant with memory. 2 years ago, I was climbing in the White Mountains with some friends. It was supposed to be an easy day hike, but the weather turned bad fast. I fell about 30 feet down a ravine and broke my leg in 3 places. Bella's breath caught in her throat. Alex, you never told me. My friends went for help, but it was getting dark and starting to snow. I was going into shock, probably hypothermic, and I thought— He paused, swallowing hard. I thought I was going to die alone on that mountain. But you didn't. No. Because Martha Robinson was hiking the same trail with her church group, and when they heard about the accident, she volunteered to stay with me while everyone else went for help. She climbed down into that ravine in the dark and the snow, and she held my hand for 6 hours until the rescue team could get to us. The revelation hit Bella like a physical blow. Martha saved your life. She saved more than my life, Alex said quietly. She saved my faith in people. Because here was this woman I'd never met, who owed me nothing, and she risked her own safety to make sure I didn't die alone. She talked to me the whole time, about her grandchildren, about her job, about how beautiful Boston looked from her front porch in the morning. She kept me conscious and calm and alive. Bella felt sick, not just with guilt over what she'd done to Martha, but with the horrible realization of what this meant for her relationship with Alex. You've been in love with her, she whispered. What? Alex looked genuinely startled. No, Bella, that's not— You've been in love with her this whole time, and I've been too stupid and self-absorbed to see it. Bella, stop. Alex's voice was firm, and he turned to face her fully. I am not in love with Martha Robinson. I love you. But I owe her a debt I can never repay, and when I saw how you treated her, it was like watching me attack a saint. It was like watching you attack someone who represents everything I believe in about human dignity and kindness, Alex said quietly. Someone who showed me what real courage looks like. The weight of it all, the magnitude of what she'd done, the depth of Alex's connection to Martha, the impossibility of ever making it right, crashed down on Bella like a wave. She doubled over on the bench, her hands covering her face as sobs shook her entire body. "I'm so sorry," she gasped. "Oh God, Alex, I'm so sorry." His arms came around her then, pulling her against his chest with the kind of fierce protectiveness that made her cry even harder. Not because she deserved his comfort, but because he was offering it anyway. "I know you are," he whispered into her hair. "And that's why I still have hope for us." They held each other on that bench in the public garden as the afternoon light faded around them, and Bella felt something fundamental shifting inside her chest. The old Isabella Thorne, the one who'd built her life on appearances and fear, was dying. In her place, something smaller but more real was beginning to take root. It was going to be the hardest thing she'd ever done, learning to be genuine instead of perfect. But as Alex held her and whispered words of hope into her hair, she thought maybe it would also be the most important. The Dorchester Community Center occupied a converted warehouse on Blue Hill Avenue, its red brick facade weathered by decades of New England winters, but welcoming in the way that only buildings filled with purpose could be. Bella sat in her BMW across the street for 20 minutes, watching people come and go through the glass front doors, teenagers with backpacks slung over their shoulders, mothers pushing strollers, elderly men carrying chess sets and newspapers. It was Thursday morning, 3 days after her conversation with Alex in the public garden, and she was about to cross a threshold that felt more significant than any corporate boardroom she'd ever entered. The interior of the community center was nothing like the gleaming offices of Beacon Hill Capital or the marble lobbies of Back Bay. The floors were polished linoleum, the walls painted cheerful yellow but showing their age, and the furniture was clearly second-hand but meticulously maintained. Children's artwork covered bulletin boards, and the air smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies and something indefinably warm that reminded Bella of her elementary school cafeteria. "Can I help you?" asked a young woman behind the reception desk, her voice friendly but slightly curious as she took in Bella's designer jeans and cashmere sweater. "I'm looking for Martha Robinson," Bella said, her voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. "Mrs. Martha's in the literacy classroom. Down the hall, second door on your left." Bella followed the directions through corridors lined with motivational posters and community announcements, the sounds of life echoing from every room, children laughing, adults discussing something in rapid Spanish, the clack of keyboards from what looked like a computer lab. The literacy classroom was larger than she'd expected, filled with mismatched tables and chairs where a dozen adults sat with workbooks and pencils, their ages ranging from teenage mothers to elderly immigrants. At the front of the room, Martha Robinson stood at a whiteboard, her gentle voice explaining the difference between there, and there, with the patience of someone who'd given this lesson hundreds of times. "Remember," Martha was saying, "if you can substitute 'they are' in the sentence, then you want 'there.' Let's try another example." Bella hovered in the doorway, unwilling to interrupt, but unable to leave. There was something mesmerizing about watching Martha teach, the way she made eye contact with each student, the encouraging nods she gave when someone raised their hand tentatively, the complete absence of condescension in her voice, despite the fact that she was explaining concepts most of her students' children had mastered years ago. "Mrs. Robinson." A woman in her 40s raised her hand, her accent thick with the rhythms of El Salvador. "I still get confused. In my work, they write a 'there' on the schedule. Is this right?" "That depends," Martha replied patiently. "Can you tell me what the sentence says? Be there at 6 o'clock. Perfect, so you're talking about a place, right? Where you need to be. That's when we use 'there.'" The woman's face lit up with understanding, and Bella felt something twist in her chest, a mixture of admiration and shame that was becoming increasingly familiar. The class ended 15 minutes later, students gathering their materials and chatting quietly in a mixture of English and Spanish as they filed out. A few stopped to thank Martha individually, their gratitude genuine and unforced. "Mrs. Thorne." Martha's voice carried across the now empty classroom. "I wondered if you might show up here eventually." Bella stepped fully into the room, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Martha, I hope you don't mind. Alex told me about this place, and I hoped maybe I could help somehow." Martha studied her with those perceptive brown eyes, taking in the expensive clothes and nervous energy. "Help how?" "I don't know," Bella admitted. "I have an MBA from Harvard and 6 years of experience in venture capital, but I'm not sure any of that translates to anything useful here." "You'd be surprised." Martha began erasing the whiteboard with methodical strokes. "And we can always use people who understand business and finance. The question is whether you're ready to use those skills for something other than making rich people richer." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and Bella felt herself straightening under its weight. "I think I am. I hope I am. This isn't charity work where you show up for photo opportunities and feel good about yourself," Martha continued, her tone gentle but unflinching. "These people need real help with real problems. They're fighting to build better lives for their families, often working 2 or 3 jobs while trying to learn English and navigate systems designed to keep them out." "I understand." "Do you?" Martha turned to face her fully. "Because last week you fired me for breathing on your crystal. Now you want to help people who clean other people's houses for a living. That's quite a change of heart." The directness was like cold water, shocking but necessary. Bella took a deep breath, reaching for honesty instead of the diplomatic deflection that would have been her instinct a week ago. "You're right to be skeptical," she said. "I've spent 6 years building a life where I don't have to think about people who struggle, where I can pretend that success is just a matter of working hard and making smart choices. But you and Alex have forced me to confront the fact that I've been living in a bubble, and that bubble has turned me into someone I don't recognize." Martha set down the eraser and leaned against her desk, her expression still guarded but listening. "I can't undo what I did to you," Bella continued. "I can't take back the humiliation or the cruelty or the fact that I tried to destroy your livelihood because I was ashamed of where I came from. But maybe I can try to become someone who deserves a second chance. And you think volunteering here will accomplish that?" "I think learning to help people without expecting anything in return might teach me who I am when I'm not performing for an audience," Bella said quietly. "I think remembering what it feels like to be around people who are fighting for something bigger than their own comfort might remind me why I wanted to succeed in the first place." Martha was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching Bella's face for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or at least the absence of self-serving manipulation. "What did Alex tell you about this place?" she asked finally. "That you run after-school programs and literacy classes? That you're trying to expand services but need funding and volunteers? Did he tell you how we started?" Bella shook her head. 5 years ago, my daughter Carmen came home from her job at the hospital and told me about a patient, an 8-year-old boy who'd been hit by a car because he was wandering the streets at night while his mother worked her second shift. No family to watch him, no safe place to go, no programs in the neighborhood that could help. Martha's voice grew softer as she continued, but there was steel underneath it. That boy spent 3 weeks in the ICU, and when he got out, he went right back to the same situation. So Carmen and I decided to do something about it. We found this space, convinced the owner to let us rent it cheap, and started with 6 kids and a card table. She gestured around the classroom that now buzzed with life and purpose. 5 years later, we serve 60 kids after school every day. We run adult literacy classes 4 nights a week, job training workshops on weekends, and a food pantry for families that need help putting dinner on the table. We do it all with volunteers and donations and the kind of determination that comes from knowing what it feels like to need help and not have anywhere to get it. The passion in Martha's voice was unmistakable, and Bella found herself leaning forward, drawn in despite herself. "It's incredible," she said, and meant it. "It's necessary," Martha corrected, "and it's fragile. We're always one rent increase or one major volunteer shortage away from having to close our doors. Which brings me back to my original question. How exactly do you want to help?" Bella thought about the question seriously, trying to move past her instinct to offer money and actually consider what skills she had that might be useful. "I'm good with numbers," she said finally, "with analyzing financial data and creating sustainable business models. Maybe I could look at your budget, help you develop a long-term funding strategy. And I know people with money who are always looking for legitimate causes to support. And you think they'd listen to you about supporting a community center in Dorchester? I think they'd listen to me about supporting a proven program that's delivering measurable results in education and community development," Bella said, her voice growing stronger as she moved into familiar territory. "And I think if I can show them data on graduation rates and job placement and family stability, they'll see this as an investment rather than charity." For the first time since she'd arrived, something that might have been approval flickered in Martha's eyes. "You'd have to spend time here first," she said. "You can't write grant applications for programs you don't understand, and you can't ask people to fund something you're not personally invested in." "I understand. I mean really spend time here, working with the kids, helping in the literacy classes, seeing what these families are up against every day. It's not pretty, Bella. It's not the kind of noble poverty you see in movies. It's people working themselves to exhaustion and still not being able to pay rent. It's kids doing their homework by streetlight because the electricity got shut off. It's systems that seem designed to punish people for being poor." The description should have been overwhelming, but instead, Bella felt something stirring in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years, the sense of being needed for something more important than quarterly profits. "When do I start?" she asked. Martha studied her for another long moment, then walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder thick with paperwork. "Background check," she said, handing it to Bella. "State requirement for anyone working with children. Fill it out, get it notarized, and bring it back tomorrow. We'll start you with the after-school program, helping kids with homework, organizing activities, learning names and stories." Bella took the folder with hands that trembled slightly. "Martha, I want you to know—" "I know," Martha said quietly. "And Bella, don't do this for Alex. Don't do it to prove something to me or to make yourself feel better about what happened last week. Do it because these kids deserve someone who's here for them, not for themselves." "I will," Bella promised, and for the first time in years, she meant something with her entire heart. As she walked back through the community center toward the exit, Bella noticed things she'd missed on her way in. The careful way the teenage volunteers helped elderly visitors navigate the computer lab, the bulletin board covered with thank you notes written in a dozen different languages, the quiet dignity of people working to build better lives for themselves and their families. It was nothing like the world she'd spent 6 years constructing, and it was more beautiful than any penthouse or boardroom she'd ever seen. By the time she reached her car, Bella had made a decision that would have terrified the woman she'd been a week ago, but felt absolutely right to the woman she was becoming. It was time to stop building a life and start living one instead. The after-school program at the Dorchester Community Center was controlled chaos at its finest. 43 children between the ages of 6 and 14 filled the main room, their energy bouncing off the walls like pinballs, while a handful of volunteers tried to maintain some semblance of order and productivity. Bella stood in the doorway on her first official day, her background check approved and her nerves jangling like live wires. She changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on jeans and a simple sweater that she hoped struck the right balance between approachable and professional. The designer labels were still there, but she'd chosen pieces that wouldn't immediately announce her net worth to anyone paying attention. "You must be Bella." A young woman with curly hair and paint-stained fingers approached her with a smile that was equal parts welcome and exhaustion. "I'm Jessica, the program coordinator. Martha said you'd be starting today." "That's me," Bella replied, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Where do you need me?" "Everywhere," Jessica laughed, gesturing at the organized mayhem around them. "But let's start you with homework help. Fair warning, some of these kids are dealing with stuff that would break your heart, but they're also the most resilient people you'll ever meet." She led Bella to a corner where 6 elementary school children sat at a round table, their backpacks dumped beside their chairs and worksheets spread across the surface like battle plans. "Guys, this is Miss Bella," Jessica announced. "She's going to help you with your homework today." 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. Bella felt herself being evaluated by critics who had absolutely no investment in being polite to make her feel better. "Hi," she said, sitting down in the remaining chair and immediately feeling like a giant among these small, serious faces. "And what are we working on?" "Math," said a girl who couldn't have been older than 8, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days. "I hate math." "Math's stupid," agreed a boy across the table, his worksheet already crumpled and refolded several times. "Math isn't stupid," protested another girl, this one wearing glasses held together with tape. "It's just hard." "What kind of math?" Bella asked, leaning forward to look at the worksheets. The problems were 3rd grade level, basic multiplication and division, but she could see the frustration in several of the children's faces. "Times tables," said the first girl with a dramatic sigh. 7 times 8. I always forget 7 times 8. "Well, what do you know about 7 times 8? Bella asked, grateful to be on familiar ground. "Do you know 7 times 7? 49. "Good. So 7 times 8 is just 7 times 7 plus 7 more. 49 plus 7 is 56. The girl's face lit up with understanding. "That's easy." For the next hour, Bella worked her way around the table, helping each child find their own path through the mathematical concepts that had been frustrating them. It was harder than any venture capital presentation she'd ever given. Not because the math was complex, but because each child brought their own learning style, their own fears, their own reasons for believing they couldn't succeed. Marcus, age 9, was convinced he was stupid at everything because his older brother constantly told him so. Elena, 7, kept apologizing for not understanding concepts the first time they were explained, as if her confusion was a personal failure. David, 8, had clearly not eaten lunch and was struggling to concentrate through his hunger. "Miss Bella?" Elena raised her hand tentatively when they'd finished the worksheets. "Are you really good at math?" "I'm okay at it," Bella replied. "Why?" "Because you explained it different than my teacher. She goes too fast, and when I ask questions, she looks mad. Sometimes teachers have a lot of students to help," Bella said carefully, not wanting to criticize anyone, but recognizing the frustration in Elena's voice. "It doesn't mean they're mad at you for asking questions." "My teacher likes the smart kids better," Marcus said matter-of-factly, not looking up from his worksheet. "And she smiles at them more." The casual acceptance in his voice broke something in Bella's chest. She thought about her own elementary school teachers, how they'd encouraged her questions and praised her curiosity. how their support had been one of the foundations of her academic success. "You know what?" she said, looking around the table at these 6 small faces. "I think you're all pretty smart. You just figured out math problems that were frustrating you an hour ago. That's what smart looks like." "Really?" Elena's eyes widened behind her taped glasses. "Really? Smart isn't about getting everything right the first time. Smart is about keeping trying until you figure it out." The words felt revolutionary coming out of her mouth, not because they weren't true, but because she'd spent 6 years believing the opposite. In her world, success meant never showing weakness, never admitting confusion, never letting anyone see you struggle. These children were teaching her something she'd forgotten, that learning required vulnerability. When homework time ended, the children scattered to different activity stations around the room. Some joined an art project led by a college student. Others gravitated toward a reading corner, where an elderly volunteer was dramatically narrating a picture bookie, and a few simply collapsed onto beanbags in the quiet corner, exhausted from their day. "How'd it go?" Jessica appeared at Bella's elbow, carrying a stack of papers and looking only slightly less frazzled than she had an hour earlier. "Better than I expected," Bella said honestly. "Those kids are incredible." "They are, and they don't get nearly enough support at school or at home through no fault of their families. When you're working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, helping with homework isn't always the priority." "What about Elena's glasses?" Bella asked, nodding toward the girl who was now carefully painting a watercolor flower. "Are those the best she can get?" "Her mom's been trying to save up for new ones for months," Jessica said quietly. "But every time she gets close to having enough, something else happens. Car repair, medical bill, rent increase. It's always something when you're living paycheck to paycheck." Bella watched Elena, squinting at her painting, leaning close to the paper to compensate for her poor vision, and felt anger building in her chest. Not anger at Elena's mother, who was clearly doing her best, but anger at a system that made it so hard for people to get basic necessities like vision correction for their children. "How much do glasses cost?" she asked. "For a kid with a basic frame and lenses." "Maybe $150. Jessica gave her a knowing look. "Don't even think about it." "Why not?" "Because Elena's not the only kid here who needs glasses. Marcus needs a dentist. David needs a winter coat that actually fits. Sophia's family is behind on rent. If you start trying to solve everyone's problems with money, you'll burn out in a month, and the kids will learn that their worth depends on finding a rich person to rescue them." The criticism stung, partly because Bella's first instinct had been exactly what Jessica described, to throw money at the problem and feel good about the quick fix. "Then what do I do?" she asked. "You show up," Jessica said simply. "You listen to their stories. You help them with their homework and believe in them when they don't believe in themselves. You be a consistent adult presence in their lives who treats them like they matter. That's worth more than money." Before Bella could respond, a commotion erupted from the art station. A boy she hadn't met yet, maybe 11 or 12 years old, was standing over a destroyed painting, his face twisted with rage, while other children backed away from him. "I hate this stupid place," he shouted, sweeping more art supplies off the table. "It's all garbage anyway." Jessica was moving before the words finished leaving his mouth, but Bella was closer. She approached the boy slowly, her hands visible and non-threatening. "Hey," she said quietly, "I'm Bella. I don't think we've met." "I don't care who you are," the boy snapped, but she could see tears threatening behind his anger. "Just leave me alone." "Okay," Bella said, settling into a chair a few feet away from him. "I'll just sit here for a minute. You can ignore me if you want." She'd learned this technique in business. Sometimes the best way to de-escalate a situation was to remove the pressure while maintaining your presence. The boy glared at her suspiciously, clearly expecting her to leave or lecture him. "What's your name?" she asked after a moment. "Carlos." "Hi, Carlos. That was a really beautiful painting you were working on. I'm sorry it got messed up." It was stupid anyway, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "Did something happen at school today?" Carlos was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Around them, the other children had gradually returned to their activities, but Bella could feel them listening. "My teacher said I cheated on my test," he said finally. "No, she said there's no way I could have gotten an A without cheating because I'm usually a C student." The casual cruelty of it took Bella's breath away. That must have felt terrible. "She made me take the test again in front of everyone, like I was some kind of criminal or something." Carlos's voice cracked, and he wiped angrily at his eyes. "I studied really hard for that test. I stayed up until midnight 2 nights in a row." "And how did you do on the second test?" "I got an A again," he said quietly, "but she still acted like I was lying about something." Bella felt rage building in her chest, not the petty anger she'd felt when Martha had touched her crystal, but a deeper, more righteous fury at the injustice of an adult crushing a child's spirit because of her own limited expectations. "Carlos, can I tell you something?" He shrugged, which she took as permission. "I think some adults forget what it's like to surprise yourself by doing better than you thought you could. They get so used to thinking they know what people are capable of that they can't recognize when someone exceeds those expectations. So she's not going to believe I'm smart no matter what I do." "Maybe not," Bella said honestly. "But that doesn't mean you're not smart. That just means she needs to learn to see better." Carlos considered this, his anger slowly deflating into something more manageable. "Miss Bella." "Yeah. Do you think I'm smart?" The question was asked with the kind of vulnerability that made Bella want to wrap this boy in her arms and promise him that everything would be okay. Instead, she looked him directly in the eyes and told him the truth. "I think you're smart enough to get A's on tests when you study hard. I think you're smart enough to know that destroying art supplies won't make you feel better, even when you're really angry. And I think you're smart enough to keep trying, even when adults treat you unfairly." Something shifted in Carlos's expression, not happiness exactly, but something like hope. "Want to help me clean up this mess?" he asked, gesturing at the scattered art supplies. "Absolutely." As they worked together to restore order to the art station, Bella realized that something fundamental was shifting inside her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about how this experience would benefit her or what she could gain from it. She was simply present, focused on these children and their needs, connected to something larger than her own ambitions. It felt like waking up after a very long sleep. 2 weeks into her volunteer work at the community center, Bella had developed a routine that would have been unrecognizable to the woman she'd been a month earlier. She arrived at the center every day at 3:30, staying until 6:30 when the after-school program ended. Her evenings were spent researching grant opportunities and foundation funding instead of attending society parties or networking events. Her life had become smaller in scope but larger in meaning, and the transformation was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Miss Bella, Miss Bella!" Eleanor ran toward her as she entered the main room, her taped glasses sliding down her nose in her excitement. "Look what I got!" She held up a math test with a bright red A+ written at the top, the paper worn soft from being folded and unfolded multiple times. "Elena, this is incredible!" Bella knelt down to the girl's eye level, studying the test with appropriate seriousness. "You got every single problem right." "I used the trick you taught me for the 7 times table," Elena said proudly, "and I remembered to check my work twice like you said. I'm so proud of you." The words came out more emotional than Bella had intended, but Elena's beam of pride was worth the momentary lapse in composure. My mom cried when she saw it, Elena confided, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. She said she knew I was smart, but sometimes the teachers don't see it. The casual mention of her mother's tears hit Bella unexpectedly hard. She thought about all the times her own mother had celebrated her academic achievements, how that support had been the foundation of her confidence and ambition. How many children in this room were starving for that same recognition? Miss Bella! Carlos appeared at her other elbow, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Can I talk to you? In private? She followed him to the quiet corner, where he perched on the edge of a beanbag and stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. My teacher wants to move me to the advanced math class, he said finally. Carlos, that's wonderful. You've been working so hard. I don't want to go. The admission stopped her cold. Why not? Because then I won't see you anymore. The advanced kids have to stay after school for extra help, and you'll be here with the regular kids. The innocence of his reasoning broke her heart. This child had found one adult who believed in him, and he was willing to sabotage his own academic progress to maintain that connection. Carlos, listen to me. She sat down across from him, making sure she had his full attention. Sis, I'm going to be here regardless of what math class you're in. If you're staying late for advanced work, I'll stay late too. But you cannot, absolutely cannot, turn down opportunities because you're afraid of losing people who care about you. But what if I'm not smart enough for the advanced class? What if they put me there and I fail? There it was, the real fear underneath his resistance. The terror that success would expose him as a fraud, that reaching higher would only lead to a more public failure. Bella recognized that fear intimately. What if you are smart enough? She asked quietly. What if you're even smarter than you know, and the only way to find out is to take the risk? Before Carlos could answer, Martha's voice cut across the room. Bella, could I see you for a moment? She found Martha in the small office she used for administrative work, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and a computer that looked like it had been cutting edge sometime during the Clinton administration. How are you settling in? Martha asked, gesturing for her to take the folding chair across from the desk. Better than I expected, Bella said honestly. These kids are incredible. They're teaching me more than I'm teaching them. That's usually how it works. Martha leaned back in her chair, studying Bella with those perceptive eyes. Jessica tells me you've been asking a lot of questions about funding and grant opportunities. I have some ideas about expanding your reach, Bella said, grateful to be on familiar ground. Your outcomes data is incredible. Kids in your program show measurable improvement in test scores, homework completion, and school attendance. That's exactly what foundations look for when they're deciding where to invest. And you think you can convince them to invest here? I think I can make a compelling case. Bella pulled out her phone and opened the presentation she'd been working on for the past week. But I've identified 12 foundations and government programs that specifically fund community education initiatives. If we could get even half of them interested, you could double your capacity within a year. Martha scrolled through the presentation slides, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she set the phone down and looked at Bella directly. This is impressive work, she said finally. Professional quality. You clearly know what you're talking about. Thank you. But I have to ask, why are you doing this? The question caught Bella off guard. What do you mean? I mean, 3 weeks ago you fired me for breathing on your crystal. Now you're spending 20 hours a week volunteering here and putting together grant proposals in your spare time. That's quite a transformation. Bella felt heat creep up her neck. Oh, I told you, I'm trying to become someone better. For Alex. The words hung between them like an accusation. Bella opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again as the truth of Martha's observation sank in. Partly, she admitted finally. At first, yes. I wanted to prove to him that I could change, that I was worth saving. And now? Bella thought about Elena's proud smile over her math test, about Carlos's fear of success, about the dozen other children who'd become real people to her instead of abstract concepts of disadvantaged youth. Now I'm doing it because these kids deserve better than what they're getting, she said quietly. Because Carlos is brilliant but convinced he's stupid. Because Elena can barely see the board at school, but her family can't afford glasses. Because David comes here hungry every day, but never complains about it. And because it makes you feel good about yourself. The directness was like a slap, and Bella's first instinct was to deflect or deny. But Martha's gaze was steady and unforgiving, demanding honesty instead of comfortable lies. Yes, she said finally. It does make me feel good about myself. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, instead of just accumulating things that prove I matter. That's honest, Martha said, and something in her tone suggested approval. Now let me ask you something else. What happens when Alex forgives you, when your relationship is back on solid ground and you don't need to prove anything anymore? I don't understand. Do you stick around when it's no longer serving your personal agenda? When helping these kids becomes routine instead of redemptive? When Carlos has a meltdown and says hurtful things? Or when Elena's progress plateaus and she gets discouraged? Or when the funding applications get rejected and we're back to counting every penny? The questions hit like physical blows because they forced Bella to confront motivations she hadn't wanted to examine too closely. Was her commitment to this place genuine, or was it just another performance, a way to rebuild her image as someone worthy of love? I don't know, she whispered. That's the most honest thing you've said since you walked in here, Martha replied. And it's why I'm going to trust you with something. She opened a file cabinet and pulled out a folder thick with medical documents and insurance forms. Elena's vision is getting worse, Martha said quietly. Her teacher called yesterday to say she's squinting so much during class that she's getting headaches. Her mother has been trying to save money for an eye exam and new glasses for 4 months, but her hours got cut at work and now they're behind on rent. Bella's heart clenched. How much do they need? It's not about the money, Bella, or not just about the money. Martha leaned forward, her expression intense. Elena's family has pride. They don't want charity. They want opportunities. They want respect. They want their daughter to succeed because of her own hard work, not because some rich lady felt sorry for them. Then what do you want me to do? I want you to figure out how to help without helping. I want you to find a way to get Eleanor the glasses she needs while preserving her family's dignity and her own sense of agency. It was a test, Bella realized, not just of her problem-solving skills, but of her ability to see people as complete human beings instead of problems to be solved with her checkbook. I need to think about this, she said. Good. Think hard, because Elena isn't the only kid here who needs something she can't get. If you're going to be part of this community, you need to learn how to help in ways that strengthen people instead of making them dependent. As Bella drove home that evening, Martha's challenge echoed in her mind. She'd spent her career finding elegant solutions to complex problems, but those problems had never involved human dignity or family pride. They'd been about market share and profit margins, where success could be measured in quarterly reports. This was different. This required her to think not just about outcomes, but about process, not just about what people needed, but about how they needed to receive it in order to maintain their sense of self-worth. By the time she reached her penthouse, Bella had the beginning of an idea. It wasn't perfect, and it would require her to use her business connections in a way she'd never considered before. But it might work. More importantly, it might help her answer Martha's fundamental question. Was she here because she wanted to help these kids, or because helping them helped her feel better about herself? The answer, she was beginning to realize, would determine not just her future at the community center, but whether she was truly capable of the transformation she claimed to want. The elegant conference room at Beacon Hill Capital had never felt more like enemy territory. Bella sat at the polished mahogany table, surrounded by her colleagues in their expensive suits and subtle power accessories, and tried to reconcile the woman she'd been 3 weeks ago with the woman she was becoming. The renewable energy startup has exceeded every benchmark we set, David Morrison was saying, his silver hair catching the afternoon light from the harbor view windows. Isabella, you've outdone yourself with this due diligence. 3 weeks ago, that praise would have filled her with satisfaction. Now it felt hollow, disconnected from anything that mattered. All she could think about was Elena squinting at her homework, Carlos afraid to succeed, and the dozen other children whose names and stories had taken up residence in her heart. "Thank you," she replied automatically, her mind already racing ahead to the proposal she was about to make. "Which brings us to our next agenda item," Morrison continued. "Patricia has identified a potential new investment opportunity that could be significant for our education portfolio." Bella straightened in her chair. This was the opening she'd been waiting for. "Actually, David, I'd like to propose something different," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "An investment opportunity that could generate both financial returns and measurable social impact." The room went quiet. In 6 years at the firm, Bella had never deviated from the script during partners' meetings. She was known for her meticulous preparation and conservative recommendations, not spontaneous proposals. "I'm listening," Morrison said, though his tone suggested caution. Bella stood up and moved to the presentation screen, her hands trembling slightly as she connected her laptop. The slides she'd been working on for the past week appeared on the wall, clean and professional, but focused on something none of them had expected. Community education initiatives in underserved neighborhoods," she began, "represent one of the highest impact investment opportunities in the current market." She clicked to the next slide, which showed outcome data from a dozen similar programs across the country. The children in well-funded after-school programs show 30% higher graduation rates, 25% improvement in standardized test scores, and significantly lower rates of juvenile crime and drug involvement. These outcomes translate to higher lifetime earnings, increased property values in surrounding neighborhoods, and reduced social services costs. "Bella," Patricia Wells interrupted, her voice carrying a note of concern. "This sounds like philanthropy, not investment strategy." "It's both." Bella clicked to her financial projections, grateful for the years of training that let her function on autopilot, even while her heart hammered against her ribs. "What if we created a fund specifically focused on education-related investments? Not grants or donations, but actual investments in programs that can demonstrate measurable outcomes." She explained her vision, a fund that would provide low-interest loans to community organizations with proven track records, allowing them to expand their services while maintaining their independence. The loans would be paid back through a combination of fee-for-service programs, government contracts, and fundraising support provided by the fund's network. "The financial returns would be modest but stable," she continued, "but the social returns would be extraordinary, and the tax advantages for our investors would be significant." The room was silent when she finished. David Morrison tapped his pen against the table in a rhythm that suggested deep thought, while Patricia looked like someone had proposed they start investing in unicorns. "This is quite a departure from your usual recommendations," Morrison said finally. "Yes, it is. Any particular reason for this sudden interest in social impact investing?" The question was loaded with implications. Bella could hear the subtext. "What's happened to you? Where's the hard-headed pragmatist we hired 6 years ago? I've been volunteering at a community centre in Dorchester," she said, deciding that honesty was her only option. And I've learned something that I should have understood years ago, that the most sustainable investments are the ones that strengthen communities instead of extracting wealth from them." "Volunteering in Dorchester," repeated Patricia, her tone suggesting that Bella had announced plans to relocate to Mars. "That's certainly unexpected." "Is this connected to your engagement?" Morrison asked bluntly. "I know Alexander Sterling is involved in various philanthropic ventures." The question hit too close to home. Bella felt heat creep up her neck as she considered how to answer without lying. "This started because of my relationship with Alex," she admitted. But it's continued because I've discovered something I want to be part of, regardless of any personal considerations." "And you think our investors will be interested in modest returns for the privilege of feeling good about themselves?" "I think our investors are sophisticated enough to recognize long-term value creation when they see it," Bella replied, her voice growing stronger. "And I think they'll appreciate the opportunity to generate returns while addressing one of the most pressing social issues of our time." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying her with the calculating gaze that had made him one of the most successful venture capitalists in New England. "Write up a formal proposal," he said finally. "Full analysis, risk assessment, comparable programs, projected timelines. If you can make the numbers work, we'll consider it. Thank you." "But Bella," his voice carried a warning, "this firm's reputation is built on our ability to generate significant returns for our investors. Don't let your personal interests compromise your professional judgment." The words followed her back to her corner office, where she stared out at Boston Harbor and tried to process what had just happened. She'd essentially announced to her colleagues that she was no longer the person they'd hired 6 years ago, and she wasn't sure whether that was professional suicide or professional evolution. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "How did the presentation go?" She stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "I'll tell you tonight. Are we still on for dinner? Looking forward to it." Their relationship had been slowly healing over the past 3 weeks, built on careful conversations and tentative trust. They'd been spending time together regularly, coffee dates and long walks, dinners where they talked about everything except the future, but they hadn't moved back in together, and Bella was acutely aware that their engagement was still in a state of suspended animation. That evening, she met Alex at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, far from the society haunts where they used to be seen. He was already seated when she arrived, reading something on his phone with the focused attention he brought to everything important. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "The traffic was brutal." "No problem." He looked up at her, and she saw something in his brown eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. "You look tired." "I presented my community education fund proposal to the partners today." "How did it go?" "They didn't laugh me out of the room, so that's something." She signaled the waitress for wine, suddenly needing something to steady her nerves. "David Morrison wants a full formal proposal with risk assessments and comparable programs." "That's great, Bella. It sounds like they're taking it seriously. Or they're humoring me while they figure out how to manage my apparent midlife crisis." Alex reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers warm and familiar against hers. "Is that what you think this is? A midlife crisis?" I don't know what this is, she admitted. 3 weeks ago, my entire identity was built around succeeding in that conference room. Now I sit there listening to discussions about profit margins and market share, and all I can think about is Elena needing glasses, and Carlos being afraid to be smart, and David coming to the center hungry every day. That sounds like growth, not crisis. Growth is supposed to be gradual. This feels more like demolition and reconstruction. Alex was quiet for a moment, studying her face with the intensity that always made her feel like he was reading her thoughts. "Do you remember the first conversation we ever had?" he asked finally. Vaguely. "Some boring charity thing at the Boston Harbor Hotel. You told me you'd gotten into venture capital because you wanted to fund companies that would create jobs and opportunities for people from backgrounds like yours. You said you were tired of watching wealth flow upward while the people who actually built things got left behind." The memory hit her like a physical blow. She had said that, hadn't she? In those early days, when she'd still believed her success could be a ladder for others to climb instead of a wall to keep them out. "When did I stop believing that?" she whispered. "I don't think you stopped believing it. I think you just got scared that caring about it would make you vulnerable." The observation was so accurate, it took her breath away. Because he was right, somewhere along the way, she'd learned that emotional investment was a liability in her professional world, that caring too much about outcomes beyond profit margins marked you as soft, naive, insufficiently committed to the bottom line. "The kids at the center don't know anything about my portfolio or my penthouse," she said quietly. "They just know whether I show up when I say I will, whether I listen when they talk, whether I believe in them when they don't believe in themselves. It's the first time in years that I've been valued for something other than my ability to generate returns. How does that feel?" Terrifying, because what if I'm not actually good at it? What if I'm just another privileged person playing at social consciousness until it becomes inconvenient? Alex's hand tightened on hers. "What if you are good at it? What if this is who you were always supposed to become, and it just took a while to find your way there?" The question hung between them like a possibility too fragile to examine too closely. Because if he was right, if this new version of herself was real and sustainable, then everything else in her life would have to change to accommodate it, including their relationship. "Alex," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay. Are we going to be okay? Really okay? Not just politely okay while we both pretend the engagement party never happened?" His eyes searched her face for a long moment before he answered. "I don't know," he said finally. "I want us to be... But Bella, I need to know that the woman I'm with is real, not just another performance designed to give me what you think I want to hear. What if I don't know the difference anymore?" "Then we figure it out together," he said quietly. "But we figure it out honestly, without scripts or strategies or careful presentation of the best possible version of yourself." That night, as Bella lay alone in her penthouse, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant sounds of the city, she thought about Alex's words. For 6 years, she'd been so focused on becoming someone worthy of love that she'd forgotten how to simply be someone capable of loving. Maybe that was the real work ahead of her, not just learning to help children with their homework or write grant proposals for community centers, but learning to show up as herself, flawed and uncertain and real, and trust that it would be enough. Outside her windows, Boston glittered like a promise, and for the first time in years, Bella felt like she might be ready to discover what that promise actually meant. 6 weeks after her first day at the Dorchester Community Center, Bella had developed a life that would have been unrecognizable to the woman she'd been 2 months earlier. Her days were split between the gleaming offices of Beacon Hill Capital, where she navigated venture capital deals and refined her community education fund proposal, and the worn linoleum floors of the center, where she helped children with homework and learned that real wealth had nothing to do with stock portfolios. The transformation hadn't been smooth. There were days when the two worlds felt so incompatible that she wondered if she was having some kind of breakdown, and nights when she lay awake wondering if Martha's skepticism was justified, if she was just another rich woman playing at social consciousness until it became inconvenient. But there were other days, like today, when everything felt perfectly aligned. "Miss Bella, Miss Bella!" Elena rushed toward her as she entered the main room. Her new glasses, purchased through a creative partnership Bella had arranged between the center and a local optometrist, sliding down her nose in her excitement. "I got picked for the advanced reading group." "Elena, that's incredible!" Bella knelt down to the girl's eye level, her heart swelling with genuine pride. "I knew you were ready for more challenging books." "Mrs. Patterson said my reading improved so much that she wants me to help tutor the younger kids," Elena continued, practically bouncing with excitement. "She said I have good instincts for teaching." The transformation in Elena over the past month had been remarkable. With proper vision correction and consistent academic support, she'd blossomed from a struggling student into a confident learner who was beginning to see her own potential. It was exactly the kind of success story that validated everything Bella had come to believe about the power of community investment. "Miss Bella." Carlos appeared at her elbow, his expression more serious than Elena's, but carrying its own quiet pride. "Can you help me with something?" "Of course. What's up?" "I got into the advanced math class like you said I should, but now they want me to apply for this summer program at MIT. For kids who are good at science and math." Bella's breath caught. MIT's summer program for middle school students was intensely competitive, designed for children who showed exceptional academic promise. The fact that Carlos had been invited to apply was a testament to how far he'd come since that first day when he'd been convinced he was stupid at everything. "Carlos, that's amazing. Are you excited?" "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What if I'm not smart enough? What if I get there and everyone realizes I don't belong?" The fear in his voice was achingly familiar. Bella saw herself in this brilliant boy who'd been convinced by a system of low expectations that his success must be some kind of mistake. "Can I tell you something?" she said, settling into a chair beside him. "When I was applying to Harvard Business School, I threw away my first application." "You did?" "I convinced myself that it was a waste of time, that they'd never accept someone like me. It took my mum finding the crumpled up papers in my trash can and making me promise to try again before I actually submitted it." "But you got in." "I did. And you know what I learned? The voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough is almost always wrong. It's just fear disguised as wisdom." Carlos considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Will you help me with the application?" "Absolutely. But Carlos, even if MIT doesn't work out, you're still brilliant. Your worth doesn't depend on any one opportunity." As she helped Carlos outline his application essay, Bella felt the familiar warmth that had become her anchor over the past weeks. This was real work, meaningful work, the kind that left her exhausted but fulfilled in ways that closing million-dollar deals had never managed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Dinner tonight. I have something I want to discuss." The message sent an unexpected flutter of nerves through her chest. Their relationship had been slowly rebuilding over the past month, built on careful conversations and tentative intimacy. But there was still a fragility to it that made her hyper-aware of every nuance in his communication. "Of course, my place or yours. Actually, I was thinking we could try that new place in the South End. 7:30, public restaurant instead of either of their homes." That could mean anything, from a desire for neutral territory to an announcement that required the buffer of other people's presence. "See you there." By the time Bella arrived at the restaurant that evening, Her nerves had wound themselves into tight knots that had nothing to do with the traffic that had made her 10 minutes late. She found Alex already seated at a corner table, his expression unreadable as he studied the wine list. "Sorry," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "The big dig strikes again." "No problem." He looked up at her, and something in his brown eyes made her pulse quicken. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." She changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple black dress that struck the right balance between effort and casualness. "You look nervous." "Do I?" He managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe a little." They ordered wine and made small talk about their respective days, but Bella could feel the weight of whatever Alex wanted to discuss hanging between them like a storm cloud. When their entrees arrived, he finally took a deep breath and set down his fork. "Bella, we need to talk about where we stand." Her heart dropped into her stomach. "Okay. These past few weeks, watching you work with those kids, seeing you discover this passion for community engagement, it's been incredible. You're becoming someone I recognize again, someone I fell in love with." "That sounds like it should be good news," she said carefully. "It is, but it's also complicated." Alex reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers warm but tense against hers. "Because I need to know that this transformation is real and permanent, not just something you're doing to save our relationship." The accusation hit her like a slap, partly because she'd wrestled with the same question herself on sleepless nights. "Alex, you know it's more than that now. You've seen me with those kids." "I have. And I believe that your commitment to them is genuine. But Bella, what happens when life gets complicated? When work demands more of your time, or when the novelty wears off, or when helping those kids becomes routine instead of redemptive? What are you really asking me?" Alex was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on their joined hands. When he finally looked up, his expression was equal parts love and resignation. "I'm asking if you're ready to build a life together based on who we actually are, not who we think we should be for each other." "I thought that's what we were doing." "Are we? Or are you performing authenticity the same way you used to perform success?" The question hit her like a physical blow because it forced her to confront a fear she'd been trying to ignore. What if her work at the community center was just another elaborate costume, a way to become the kind of person Alex wanted instead of discovering who she actually was? "I don't know," she whispered. "That's what I was afraid of." The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, other diners laughed and talked, oblivious to the relationship quietly dissolving at table 12. "What are you saying?" Bella asked finally. "Monas, I'm saying that I think we need to take a real break, not a pause while you prove something to me, but actual space to figure out who we are individually before we try to be anything together." "Alex, no, please." The desperation in her voice embarrassed her, but she couldn't seem to control it. "I know I'm still figuring things out, but I love you. I've never loved anyone the way I love you." "I love you too," he said quietly. But love isn't enough if we're not sure who we're loving. What does that mean for us, practically?" Alex reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the engagement ring she'd given back to him 6 weeks ago when everything had fallen apart. "It means I think you should keep this," he said, placing it on the table between them. Not as a promise or a deadline, but as a reminder that what we had was real, even if we're not sure what comes next. Bella stared at the box, her vision blurring with tears she was trying desperately not to shed in the middle of a crowded restaurant. "How long?" she managed. "I don't know, 6 months, a year. However long it takes for both of us to be certain about who we are and what we want. And what if we figure out that we don't want the same things anymore? Then we'll deal with that honestly instead of trying to force something that isn't working." The ride home to her penthouse was a blur of tears and traffic lights. Bella drove on autopilot, her mind reeling with the implications of what had just happened. She hadn't just lost her fiancé. She'd lost the entire future she'd been building in her mind, the carefully constructed life that had given her identity, meaning and purpose. By the time she reached her building, the tears had dried, but left something worse in their place, a hollow emptiness that felt like mourning. Her penthouse, with its perfect furniture and expensive art, felt like a mausoleum. Every surface reflected back a life built on appearances, on the desperate need to prove she belonged somewhere she'd never actually wanted to be. She walked to her bedroom closet and stared at the rows of designer clothes, the shoes that cost more than most people made in a month, the accessories that announced her wealth to anyone paying attention. 6 years of careful acquisition, all of it suddenly meaningless. On her nightstand, the engagement ring box sat like an accusation. She opened it and stared at the diamond that had once represented everything she'd wanted: security, status, proof that she'd made it in a world designed to exclude people like her. Now it just looked like a very expensive prison. Her phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "How did dinner go?" Bella stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Alex wants to take a break, a real one." The response came immediately. "I'm coming over. You don't have to. I'm already in the car." 20 minutes later, Chloe burst through the front door with the kind of righteous fury that only sisters could muster. "What the hell happened?" she demanded, taking in Bella's tear-stained face and the engagement ring box sitting open on the coffee table. "He thinks I'm performing authenticity instead of actually being authentic," Bella said, the words feeling strange and hollow in her mouth. "Are you?" The blunt question was so typical of Chloe that it almost made Bella smile despite everything. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I was changing, becoming someone better. But maybe I was just becoming someone I thought he wanted me to be." Chloe sat down beside her on the white leather sofa, her expression softening from anger to concern. "Bella, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you're at that community center working with those kids, are you thinking about Alex? About what he'll think of you for being there?" Bella considered the question seriously, thinking about her time with Eleanor and Carlos and David, about the quiet satisfaction she felt when she helped a child understand a difficult concept, or the fierce protectiveness that arose when someone treated them unfairly. "No," she said finally. "When I'm there, I'm just there, present, focused on them." "Then maybe the problem isn't that you're performing authenticity," Chloe said gently. "Maybe the problem is that you're so used to performing everything else that you don't trust anything real when you find it." The observation hit Bella like a revelation, because Chloe was right. She'd spent so many years carefully constructing every aspect of her public persona that she'd lost the ability to recognize genuine feeling when it happened. "Oh, what do I do?" she whispered. "You keep showing up," Chloe said simply. "For those kids, for yourself, for the person you're becoming. And you stop worrying about whether it's good enough for anyone else." That night, as Bella lay alone in her perfect bed, in her perfect penthouse, surrounded by all the perfect things that had once defined her worth, she made a decision that would have terrified the woman she'd been 6 months ago. It was time to stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be real, regardless of who was watching or what they thought of the results. It was time to discover who Isabella Thorne actually was when she stopped performing entirely. 3 months after Alex had asked for space, Bella's life had settled into a rhythm that was both more grounded and more uncertain than anything she'd experienced in years. Her mornings were spent at Beacon Hill Capital, where her community education fund proposal had been approved for a pilot program with cautious enthusiasm from the partners. Her afternoons belonged to the Dorchester Community Centre, where she'd become an integral part of the daily operations. The work felt sustainable now, less like penance and more like purpose. She'd stopped counting the hours she spent there or analysing her motivations under a microscope. When Carlos needed help with his MIT application, she helped him. When Elena wanted to practice her reading, she listened. When David arrived hungry, she quietly made sure he got fed without making him feel like a charity case. But the absence of Alex in her life was like a phantom limb, always present, always aching, impossible to ignore despite the meaningful work that filled her days. "Miss Bella." Elena appeared at her elbow as she organized supplies in the art room, the girl's new glasses reflecting the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Are you sad?" The question caught Bella off guard. She thought she'd been doing a better job of hiding the melancholy that had settled over her like a fine layer of dust, coloring everything but never quite overwhelming it. "What makes you ask that? You smile when we're working on stuff, and you laugh when Carlos makes jokes, but sometimes when you think nobody's looking, your face gets really quiet and sad." The perceptiveness of children never failed to astonish her. Elena had seen through 6 years of practiced emotional control to something Bella hadn't even been fully aware she was projecting. "I am a little sad," she admitted. "But not because of anything happening here. You guys make me happy. Is it because of your boyfriend, the tall one who used to come visit sometimes?" Bella's chest tightened. Alex had stopped by the center a few times in the early weeks of their separation, ostensibly to check on funding for various projects, but really, she suspected, to see how she was adjusting to their new reality. Those visits had been cordial but careful, both of them walking on eggshells around the love that was still there, but no longer had a clear path forward. "Yes," she said simply. "Sometimes adults have to figure out who they are before they can be good partners for each other." "That sounds lonely." "It is lonely sometimes, but it's also important." Eleanor considered this with the seriousness that children brought to emotional concepts they didn't yet fully understand. My mama says that sometimes you have to be brave enough to be by yourself before you can be brave enough to be with someone else." "Your mama sounds very wise." "She is. She also says that people who really love you will wait while you figure stuff out, if the figuring out is real and not just being scared." The observation hit Bella with unexpected force. She'd been so focused on proving to Alex that she was capable of change that she'd lost sight of a more fundamental question. Was she changing because she was genuinely growing, or because she was still running from the fear of not being enough? Before she could respond to Elena's wisdom, commotion erupted from the main room, raised voices, the scrape of chairs being pushed back, and underneath it all, the sound of someone crying. Bella and Elena rushed toward the noise to find Carlos standing in the center of a circle of concerned adults and curious children, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. In his hands was a crumpled piece of paper that she recognized as his MIT application. "What happened?" Bella asked Jessica, who was trying to calm the situation with limited success. "Carlos got his rejection letter," Jessica said quietly, "and then Mrs. Henderson from the school district showed up for her quarterly inspection." Bella's blood ran cold. Mrs. Henderson was the bureaucrat whose job it was to evaluate community programs that received any form of government funding, a process that was supposed to ensure accountability but often felt more like harassment designed to find reasons to cut programs. "She made some comment about the caliber of students here," Jessica continued, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Carlos heard it and lost his temper." Bella looked over at Mrs. Henderson, a thin woman in her 50s whose expression suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. The bureaucrat's gaze swept the room with the kind of professional disdain that Bella recognized from her own worst moments, the look of someone who'd decided that poor children weren't worth the effort it took to help them. "Carlos," Bella said gently, approaching him with the same care she'd use with a wounded animal. "Can we talk outside for a minute?" "I don't want to talk," Carlos snapped, but the tears in his voice betrayed him. "I'm tired of people telling me I'm not good enough. I'm tired of getting my hopes up just to get knocked down again." "I know, but—" "You don't know," he interrupted, his young voice cracking with pain and rage. "You don't know what it's like to have people look at you like you're stupid before you even open your mouth. You don't know what it's like to work twice as hard as everyone else just to get half as far." The accusation hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unfair, but because it was partially true. For all her own struggles with imposter syndrome and class anxiety, she'd never faced the systematic barriers that Carlos navigated every day. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't know what that's like, but I do know what it's like to let other people's limited expectations become your own truth. And I know that you're too smart and too strong to let one rejection letter define your future. MIT said I wasn't ready," Carlos said, his voice smaller now. "They said I need more preparation before I can handle their program. That's not the same as saying you're not smart enough. That's them saying you need more opportunities to show how smart you are." Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat pointedly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do need to complete my evaluation. Perhaps we could continue this discussion later." The dismissive tone in her voice triggered something primal in Bella's chest. This woman was treating Carlos's pain like an inconvenience, his dreams like paperwork to be processed and filed away. "And actually," Bella said, turning to face Mrs. Henderson with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, "I think this is exactly what you need to see." She walked over to the bulletin board where the center displayed student achievements, test scores, artwork, essays, photos from field trips and graduation ceremonies. "This is Carlos Martinez," she said, gesturing to several photos and academic achievements posted on the board. But last year, he was failing math and convinced he was too stupid to succeed at anything. This year, he's in advanced classes and was invited to apply to one of the most competitive academic programs in the country. Mrs. Henderson looked bored. "I'm sure the children here do their best." "He didn't just do his best," Bella interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "He transformed his entire academic trajectory because someone believed in him and gave him the support he needed. That's what this program does. It doesn't just babysit children while their parents work, it changes lives." "Miss Thorne, Isabella Thorne." "Miss Thorne, while I appreciate your enthusiasm, my job is to evaluate measurable outcomes, not individual anecdotes." "Fine. Let's talk about measurable outcomes." Bella pulled out her phone and opened the data presentation she'd been refining for months. Children in this program show an average of 35% improvement in standardized test scores. Attendance rates improve by 40%. High school graduation rates for program alumni are 28% higher than the neighborhood average. She clicked through slide after slide of data, her voice growing more passionate as she detailed the evidence of what this place accomplished with limited resources and unlimited heart. "These aren't anecdotes," she concluded. "This is transformation happening 50 kids at a time, every day, because people like Martha Robinson refuse to accept that zip code determines destiny." Mrs. Henderson's expression had shifted from boredom to grudging attention. "This data is quite impressive. Where did you compile it from?" "I compiled it myself. I'm a venture capitalist with Beacon Hill Capital, and I've been volunteering here for the past 4 months." The revelation clearly surprised Mrs. Henderson, who'd obviously categorized Bella as just another bleeding heart volunteer without relevant credentials. "You work at Beacon Hill Capital, and you volunteer here?" "Yes. Because I've learned that the best investments are the ones that strengthen communities instead of extracting wealth from them." Behind her, Bella could feel the attention of everyone in the room. Children, volunteers, staff members, all of them listening to her defend something they all believed in but rarely heard, articulated with the authority that came from her professional credentials. Furthermore, she continued, her voice gaining momentum, if the state is serious about improving educational outcomes in underserved communities, it should be increasing funding for programs like this, not sending inspectors to find reasons to cut support. Ms. Thorne, I'm simply doing my job. Your job should be helping these children succeed, not treating them like potential budget cuts. The room was completely silent now. Even Carlos had stopped crying, staring at Bella with an expression of amazement that someone was fighting for him with such fierce authority. Mrs. Henderson straightened her papers with sharp, efficient movements. I'll complete my evaluation and submit my report to the district office. Good day. As the bureaucrat left, the room remained quiet for a long moment. Then Carlos walked over to where Bella stood and, without saying a word, wrapped his arms around her waist in a hug that nearly broke her heart. Thank you, he whispered into her sweater. Thank you, she replied, meaning it completely. As she held this brilliant boy who'd been told his dreams were too big, Bella realized something fundamental had shifted inside her chest. She wasn't fighting for these children because it made her feel good about herself, or because it impressed Alex, or because it fit some narrative about personal redemption. She was fighting for them because they deserved to be fought for, and she had the skills and resources to do it effectively. For the first time in her life, her success felt like it had real purpose beyond proving her own worth. It felt like the beginning of something that might actually last. The charity gala at the Boston Harbor Hotel was the kind of event Bella had once lived for. 500 of Boston's wealthiest citizens gathered in their finest attire to bid outrageous sums on vacation packages and art pieces while feeling virtuous about supporting a worthy cause. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and carefully arranged orchids, and the guest list read like a who's who of New England's old money elite. 6 months ago, Bella would have spent weeks preparing for this event, selecting the perfect dress, researching every influential attendee, strategizing conversations that might advance her career or social standing. Tonight, she almost hadn't come at all, but the cause was literacy programs for underserved communities, and Martha had specifically asked her to attend. The Dorchester Community Center was one of the beneficiaries, and Bella had promised to help secure commitments from potential donors. She moved through the crowd in a navy blue gown that was elegant but understated, making the rounds with the practiced ease of someone who'd navigated these waters for years. The difference was that now she actually cared about the outcome of her conversations. Isabella, darling. Victoria Ashworth materialized beside her in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely contained gossip. You look absolutely radiant, different somehow, very authentic. The word choice was interesting, and Bella wondered if Victoria had heard rumors about her recent transformation. Thank you, Victoria. How's Richard? Oh, you know Richard. Still convinced he can lower his handicap through sheer force of will. Victoria's laugh was practiced and empty. But tell me, darling, what's this I hear about you working with children in Dorchester? News traveled fast in Boston's social circles. Apparently, I volunteer at a community center, Bella said simply. It's incredibly rewarding work. How admirable. Though I have to ask, is this related to the rumors about you and Alexander? People are saying you two have decided to take some time apart. The casual cruelty in Victoria's voice was like a familiar poison. This was how their world worked. Other people's pain transformed into entertainment, relationships dissected for social currency. Alex and I are figuring some things out, Bella replied, keeping her voice neutral. Of course, these things happen. Though I have to say, it would be such a shame if... Victoria, Bella interrupted gently but firmly. "I'd love to tell you about the literacy program we're supporting tonight. The results have been extraordinary." She launched into a detailed description of the center's work, watching Victoria's eyes glaze over with the kind of polite boredom that greeted any conversation that wasn't about gossip or shopping. By the time she finished, Victoria had spotted someone more interesting across the room and excused herself with air kisses and empty promises to catch up soon. The interaction left Bella feeling oddly liberated. 6 months ago, Victoria's approval had mattered to her. Tonight, it felt irrelevant. That was expertly handled. The familiar voice made her turn sharply. Alex stood behind her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his brown eyes warm with something that might have been pride. "Alex." Her heart did that familiar skip, and she had to resist the urge to smooth her hair or check her makeup. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." "Last-minute decision. I heard Martha was going to be here to accept a recognition award, and I wanted to support her." Of course he was here for Martha. The reminder of their connection and of how it had led to the unraveling of her relationship with Alex sent a familiar pang through her chest. "That's wonderful. She deserves all the recognition in the world." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, surrounded by the glittering chaos of the gala, but somehow isolated in their own bubble of unresolved feelings. "You look beautiful," Alex said finally. "Thank you." "You look good too." It was inadequate, but anything more felt dangerous. "How are you, really?" The question was loaded with subtext, not just polite small talk, but a genuine inquiry into her well-being from someone who'd once known her better than she knew herself. "I'm good," she said, and realized she meant it. Different, but good. "The work at the center has become really important to me." "I can see that." "I heard about your confrontation with the district inspector. Carlos couldn't stop talking about how you defended him." Heat crept up Bella's neck. "You heard about that?" "Martha mentioned it. She was impressed." His voice carried a note of something that might have been admiration. "She said you've become quite the advocate." Before Bella could respond, the lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the stage where the evening's program was about to begin. They moved toward the seating area with hundreds of other guests, ending up at adjacent tables through what felt like either coincidence or cosmic intervention. The program included the usual mix of testimonials and appeals for donations, but Bella found herself genuinely engaged for the first time at one of these events. When Martha was called to the stage to accept her recognition award, the entire room rose in applause that felt sincere rather than obligatory. Martha looked elegant in a simple black dress, her graying hair styled carefully and her dignity radiating across the ballroom as she approached the microphone. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "This award is an honor, but it belongs to every volunteer, every donor, and every child who's walked through our doors believing they deserve better than what the world has offered them so far." The speech was perfect. Heartfelt without being maudlin, specific without being boring, inspiring without being preachy. Bella found herself leaning forward in her seat, hanging on every word. "5 years ago," Martha continued, "we started our program with 6 children and a card table. Today, we serve 60 kids every day. But more importantly, we've learned something about what happens when communities invest in their most vulnerable members." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room with the confidence of someone who belonged anywhere she chose to stand. "We've learned that potential isn't determined by zip code or family income. We've learned that the difference between a child who succeeds and one who doesn't often comes down to whether one adult believes in them enough to fight for their dreams. And we've learned that when we invest in children, we don't just change their lives, we transform entire communities." The applause that followed was thunderous. and Bella felt tears spring to her eyes as she watched this woman who'd saved Alex's life, now inspiring a room full of people who had the resources to change others, lives in return. When the formal program ended and the crowd began to mingle again, Bella found herself searching for Martha in the crush of well-dressed donors. She wanted to congratulate her personally, to tell her how moving her speech had been. She found Martha near the silent auction tables, surrounded by a small crowd of admirers, but somehow managing to give each person her full attention. As Bella approached, Martha caught her eye and smiled with genuine warmth. "Bella, I was hoping you'd be here tonight. Your speech was incredible," Bella said, when the crowd around Martha had dispersed. "You made everyone in that room understand what this work really means." "Thank you. Though I have to say, I learned a lot about advocacy from watching you stand up to Mrs. Henderson last month. That was nothing compared to this. You commanded that room." "Practice," Martha said with a slight smile. 5 years of convincing people that poor children deserve investment, not pity." They were interrupted by the arrival of a couple Bella recognized from various social events, the Pemberton family, whose foundation funded education initiatives throughout New England. "Mrs. Robinson," said Catherine Pemberton, a woman in her 60s whose understated elegance spoke of old money and older values. "Your speech tonight was extraordinary. We'd love to discuss potential funding opportunities with your organization." As Martha gracefully shifted into conversation with the Pembertons, Bella stepped back to give them space. She was turning to head toward the bar when she collided with someone moving in the opposite direction. "I'm so sorry," she began, then stopped as she recognized the woman she'd bumped into. It was Sarah Chen, Alex's ex-girlfriend from Harvard. Tall, elegant, brilliant, everything Bella had always felt inadequate compared to. Sarah was a pediatric surgeon now, spending her days literally saving children's lives while making the world a measurably better place. "Bella, what a surprise to see you here." Sarah's smile was genuine, which somehow made the encounter more uncomfortable than if she'd been fake. "How are you?" "I'm good, thank you. Congratulations on your promotion to Chief of Pediatric Surgery." "Alex mentioned it. Thank you. It's been an incredible opportunity." Sarah paused, her expression growing more serious. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I heard about you and Alex taking some time apart. I'm sorry. I know how much you two meant to each other." The kindness in her voice was almost harder to bear than Victoria Ashworth's gossip. Sarah was being genuinely compassionate about the end of a relationship with a man she'd once loved herself. "And we're both figuring some things out," Bella said, using the same diplomatic phrase she'd deployed earlier. "For what it's worth, Alex speaks about you with enormous respect and affection. Whatever you're both working through, I hope you find your way back to each other." Before Bella could respond, Sarah had moved on to greet other acquaintances, leaving Bella standing alone with her thoughts and a growing sense of emotional claustrophobia. She needed air, space, time to process the strange, surreal nature of the evening. She made her way to the hotel's terrace, which overlooked Boston Harbor and provided a respite from the noise and intensity of the gala. The October night was crisp and clear, the harbor dotted with lights from boats and the distant airport. Bella leaned against the railing and tried to make sense of the conflicting emotions churning in her chest. "Wouldn't mind if I join you?" She turned to find Alex approaching with 2 glasses of champagne, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Please," she said, accepting one of the glasses gratefully. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a plane take off from Logan Airport and disappear into the star-filled sky. "That was quite an evening," Alex said finally. "Martha was incredible. She deserves every bit of recognition she gets." "She does. Though I have to say, watching you work that room tonight was pretty impressive too." Bella looked at him questioningly. "I saw you talking to the Weatherbys about funding for after-school programs." And the conversation with David Morrison about your community education fund, that was masterful. You were watching me. I was watching someone I used to know become someone even better, he said quietly. Someone who can navigate that world without losing herself in it. The observation hit her unexpectedly hard, because he was right. Tonight had been the first time she'd attended one of these events as fully herself, using her skills and connections in service of something that mattered to her, instead of something designed to advance her own position. "Would Alex," she said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think we're ready?" "Ready for what?" "To stop figuring things out separately and start figuring them out together." The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure was strong enough to hold their weight. Alex was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the harbor lights. "I think," he said finally, "that I'm tired of pretending I don't miss you every single day. And I think the woman standing next to me tonight is someone I'd like to know better, even though she's also somehow exactly who I fell in love with 2 years ago. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me," Bella said, her voice thick with emotion. "Even more romantic than, 'Will you marry me?' Especially more romantic than that. Because this time, you're choosing me for who I actually am instead of who I thought I needed to be." Alex set down his champagne glass and turned to face her fully, his hands finding her waist with the familiarity of 2 years of love and 6 months of loss. "Isabella Thorne," he said, his voice soft but certain, "will you please come home with me tonight? Not to get back together, not to solve everything, but just to be together and see what that feels like now." "Yes," she whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him with all the love and hope and hard-won wisdom of someone who'd finally learned the difference between performing and living. As they held each other on that terrace overlooking the city where they'd both learned to become themselves, Bella felt something settle in her chest that she'd never experienced before. Not just love, but trust. Trust in Alex, trust in herself, and trust in the possibility that they might actually be able to build something real together, something that would last. 8 months after the engagement party that had changed everything, Bella stood in the bridal suite of the Boston Public Library, staring at herself in a full-length mirror that reflected back a woman she was still learning to recognize. The wedding dress was simpler than the elaborate gown she'd originally chosen, elegant ivory silk without excessive beading or dramatic trains, beautiful but not designed to make statements about the bride's net worth. Today was her actual wedding day, rescheduled and reimagined after months of rebuilding their relationship from the ground up. The guest list was smaller, the venue more meaningful, and the woman getting married was fundamentally different from the one who'd fired Martha Robinson in a moment of cruel panic. "You look perfect," Chloe said from behind her, making final adjustments to the simple pearl necklace that had been their grandmother's. "Happy? Real. I feel real," Bella said, and meant it. Terrified, but real. Good terrified or bad terrified? Good terrified. The kind that means you're about to do something that matters. The past 8 months had been a carefully choreographed dance of rebuilding trust and rediscovering each other. She and Alex had taken things slowly, individual therapy, couples counseling, long conversations about who they were becoming and what they wanted to build together. Her work at the community center had deepened and expanded, and her community education fund at Beacon Hill Capital had become one of the firm's most successful initiatives. Most importantly, she'd learned to be alone with herself without panic, to find worth and meaning that didn't depend on external validation or performance. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Alex's mother or one of her bridesmaids. Instead, Martha Robinson stepped into the room, elegant in a navy blue dress with her graying hair styled carefully. Bella's breath caught in her throat, not with the old panic of being found out, but with genuine emotion at seeing this woman who'd played such a crucial role in her transformation. "Martha," she said, crossing the room to embrace her warmly. "And I'm so glad you're here. I wouldn't have missed it," Martha replied, her gentle smile carrying the warmth that Bella had come to treasure over the past months. "You look beautiful, Bella, radiant. Thank you for being here, for everything you've taught me, for being who you are," Martha interrupted gently. "You've become quite an advocate for those kids. Elena told me yesterday that you're the reason she believes she can be anything she wants when she grows up." The mention of Elena made Bella's eyes fill with tears that she quickly blinked back, not wanting to ruin her makeup before the ceremony. "She's the reason I believe I can be anything I want, too," Bella said quietly. Chloe discreetly stepped out to give them privacy, and Martha moved closer to the mirror where Bella stood. "I have something for you," Martha said, reaching into her small purse and pulling out a tissue-wrapped package. A wedding gift. Bella unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small silver frame containing a photo she'd never seen before. It showed her working with a group of children at the community center, her face animated as she helped Carlos with a math problem while Elena and David looked on. She was laughing at something one of them had said, completely unself-conscious, utterly present in the moment. "When was this taken?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "About 2 months ago. Jessica took it during one of your tutoring sessions." Martha's voice was soft but certain. "Soft, but I wanted you to have it because I wanted you to see what I see. Someone who's found her true calling and her true self." "Martha, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll remember this moment and this feeling when life gets complicated. Say you'll remember that the woman in this photograph is who you really are, not the frightened girl who fired me 9 months ago." Before Bella could respond, more voices filled the hallway outside, wedding party members and family gathering for the final preparations. Martha stepped back, her expression warm but serious. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said quietly. "Something Alex asked me to share with you today." Bella's heart quickened. "What?" "The story of how he and I really met. The whole story, not just the mountain rescue version, you know." Martha moved to the window that overlooked the library's courtyard, where guests were beginning to take their seats for the outdoor ceremony. 2 years ago, Alex was climbing in the White Mountains with friends. But what he didn't tell you was why he was there." "What do you mean?" "He was there because he was trying to figure out whether he wanted to propose to you." Martha's voice was gentle but unflinching. He was terrified that he was in love with someone who didn't really exist, someone who was performing a version of herself instead of being authentic. The revelation hit Bella like a physical blow. "He was having doubts about me even then. He was having doubts about whether you trusted him enough to be real with him," Martha corrected. "He could see how hard you were working to be perfect, and he was afraid that if he proposed, you'd say yes to the image you thought he wanted, instead of because you genuinely wanted to build a life together." Bella sank into a nearby chair, her carefully arranged composure cracking as the implications of this new information sank in. "So when he fell," she said slowly, "he was literally and figuratively at the lowest point in our relationship. Yes. And when I stayed with him through that night, he talked about you constantly, not about how beautiful you were or how successful, but about glimpses he'd caught of who you really were underneath all the performance. The way you talked about your family when you thought no one was listening. The time you cried during a commercial about animal rescue. The way you asked the cleaning staff at restaurants about their families." Martha sat down across from her, her expression full of compassion. "He saw the real you, even when you were trying to hide her. But he didn't know if you'd ever trust him enough to let her out permanently. And now, Now he's marrying someone who shows up authentically every single day, someone who fights for children who can't fight for themselves, someone who's learned that being vulnerable is actually the strongest thing you can do. The tears came then, despite Bella's efforts to preserve her makeup. Martha handed her tissues and waited patiently while she processed this final piece of the puzzle that had been her relationship with Alex. "Martha," she said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Of course." "Do you think he would have proposed to me that weekend if he hadn't fallen?" Martha was quiet for a long moment, her gaze thoughtful and kind. "I think he would have come home and asked you to go to couples therapy," she said finally. "I think he would have tried to find a way to reach the real you before making any permanent decisions. And if that hadn't worked, then you wouldn't be getting married today. But Bella, that's not what happened. What happened was that life gave you both a wake-up call, his literal, yours metaphorical, and you both chose to do the hard work of becoming people worthy of the love you claimed to feel." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Chloe peeked in. "5 minutes, Bella. Everyone's ready when you are." As Martha prepared to leave for her seat in the ceremony, she paused at the door. "Bella, can I give you one last piece of advice? Please. When you walk down that aisle today, don't think about the woman you used to be or the mistakes you've made. Think about the woman in that photograph, the teacher, the advocate, the person who shows up every day for children who need her. That's who Alex is marrying. That's who you really are." 10 minutes later, Bella stood at the entrance to the library's courtyard, her arm linked through her father's as they waited for the music to begin. The guest list was a careful mixture of family, close friends, and people who'd played important roles in their journey, colleagues from both their professional worlds, volunteers from the community center, and children whose presence meant more to her than any society connection ever could. Elena sat in the front row wearing a new dress and her updated glasses, beaming with the pride of someone who'd been personally invited by the bride. Carlos was there too, looking uncomfortable in his dress clothes but present, because Bella had specifically asked him to come. David and a dozen other children from the center filled several rows, their excitement at being included in such a fancy event radiating across the courtyard. And in the front row on the groom's side, Martha Robinson sat with quiet dignity, her gentle smile encompassing both the couple getting married and the journey that had brought them to this moment. As the music began and Bella took her first steps down the aisle, she caught Alex's eyes and saw in them not just love, but recognition. He was seeing her, really seeing her, and choosing her anyway. She was no longer performing for an audience or trying to prove her worth through external achievements. She was simply walking toward the man she loved, ready to build a life based on authenticity instead of appearance, service instead of status, genuine connection instead of careful calculation. For the first time in her adult life, Isabella Thorne was exactly who she was supposed to be, and it was more than enough. The wedding ceremony in the Boston Public Library's courtyard was everything Bella had never known she wanted. Intimate, meaningful, and completely authentic. As she and Alex exchanged vows they'd written themselves, surrounded by the people who'd witnessed their journey from performance to reality, she felt the profound satisfaction of a life finally aligned with its true purpose. But the real test came during the reception. The celebration was being held at Ndinded Park, the restaurant where Alex had proposed 18 months earlier. The space had been transformed with simple elegance, white roses and candles, soft lighting that made everyone look radiant, tables arranged to encourage conversation rather than display wealth. Bella moved through the reception as herself, not the carefully curated version she'd once performed at similar events, but the woman who'd learned to find joy in genuine connection. She spent time with each table, thanking guests for coming, sharing stories about how they'd influenced her journey, and actually listening to their responses instead of calculating how each interaction might benefit her. She was laughing with a group of community center volunteers when she noticed a commotion near the entrance. A woman in an expensive suit was speaking animatedly with the maître d', her voice carrying across the room with the kind of entitled indignation that Bella recognized from her former world. "This is completely unacceptable," the woman was saying, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "I specifically requested that the cleaning staff stay out of sight during the event. Having them visible in the dining room is unprofessional and inappropriate." Bella's blood turned to ice as she realized what was happening. The woman, someone she vaguely recognized from various society events, was complaining about the cleaning staff who were quietly working to maintain the restaurant's standards during the reception. But it was worse than that. The staff member being targeted was Rosa, a woman in her 50s who'd been cleaning at No. 9 Park for years and who'd specifically been assigned to help with the wedding because of her reputation for discretion and efficiency. "Ma'am, I understand your concern," the maître d' was saying, clearly trying to diffuse the situation, "but our staff are simply maintaining the space to ensure everything remains perfect for the celebration." "I don't care about your policies," the woman snapped. "I'm paying for an elegant experience, and having the help visible during dinner destroys the ambiance. Remove her immediately." The ugly entitlement in her voice transported Bella back to her own worst moment, the day she'd humiliated Martha in front of her engagement party guests, driven by the same toxic combination of insecurity and superiority that was now poisoning her wedding reception. Rosa stood nearby, her dignity intact, but her eyes reflecting the familiar pain of someone being treated as less than human because of her job. She was preparing to quietly remove herself from the situation, to make herself invisible in order to preserve the comfort of someone who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience. The old Bella might have pretended not to notice, might have allowed the situation to resolve itself quietly to avoid making a scene at her own wedding. The old Bella might have calculated the social cost of intervention and decided it was too high. But the woman Bella had become, the teacher, the advocate, the person who'd learned that dignity was something you stood up for, not something you preserved by staying silent, couldn't let this moment pass. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the group with the calm authority she'd developed over months of fighting for her students. "Is there a problem here?" The complaining woman turned toward her, and her expression immediately shifted when she recognized the bride. "Oh, Mrs. Sterling, congratulations on your beautiful wedding. I was just addressing a small service issue with the staff." "What kind of service issue?" "Nothing serious, just requesting that the cleaning staff maintain a lower profile during the reception. You understand, maintaining the elegant atmosphere you've created." Bella looked at Rosa, who was standing with the quiet dignity of someone who'd endured this treatment too many times to be surprised by it. Then she looked back at the complaining woman and felt something crystallize in her chest that was part fury and part absolute clarity. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the nearby tables, "but I think there's been a misunderstanding." Several conversations stopped as people turned to see what was happening. Alex appeared at her elbow, his expression alert as he assessed the situation. "The only service issue I see," Bella continued, her voice growing stronger, "is a guest treating a valued member of this restaurant's team with disrespect." The woman's face flushed red. "Mrs. Sterling, I hardly think—" "Rosa has been part of the No 9 Park family for years," Bella interrupted, turning to address the crowd that was now openly listening. "She's here tonight because this restaurant specifically chose their most trusted and professional staff to help make our celebration perfect." She moved closer to Rosa, her voice warm as she addressed her directly. "Rosa, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for helping to make this day special. Your work matters, and you matter." The older woman's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded wordlessly as the crowd around them began to understand what was happening. "Furthermore," Bella said, turning back to the complaining woman, "if you find the presence of working people offensive, then you've fundamentally misunderstood what this celebration is about." Alex stepped closer, his presence supportive but allowing her to handle the situation herself. "My husband and I believe that a person's worth is determined by their character and their kindness, not by their job title or their bank account. We believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of whether they're serving dinner or cleaning tables or running companies." The reception had gone completely quiet now, all conversations suspended as guests watched this unexpected moment unfold. In the silence, Bella could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sounds of the city beyond the restaurant walls. "So, if you're uncomfortable sharing space with people who work for a living," she continued, her voice steady but implacable, "then I suggest you find a different celebration to attend. Because this one is for people who understand that everyone deserves respect." The woman stared at Bella for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She'd clearly expected the bride to smooth over the situation diplomatically, not to be publicly called out for her behavior. I think there's been a misunderstanding," she stammered. "I don't think there has," Bella replied calmly. "Well, I think you've made your values very clear, and I've made mine clear as well." Without another word, the woman gathered her purse and headed for the exit, her heels clicking against the floor with sharp, angry sounds that announced her displeasure to everyone within earshot. As she left, the reception remained quiet for another moment. Then Carlos, sitting at a table with other children from the community center, began to clap. The applause spread quickly through the room, not polite social applause, but genuine appreciation for someone who'd stood up for what was right. Rosa approached Bella with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you for being here," Bella replied, embracing her warmly. "Thank you for making our day beautiful." As the reception returned to its celebratory atmosphere, Alex pulled Bella aside near the windows that overlooked the city. "That was incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was the woman I fell in love with, the person I always knew you could be." "That was the woman you helped me become," she replied, "by refusing to let me hide behind performance and fear." "No, Bella. That was all you. I just waited for you to trust yourself enough to let her out." Later that evening, as the reception wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, Martha approached Bella one final time. "I saw what happened earlier," she said quietly, "with Rosa. It felt familiar," Bella admitted. Like a test I hadn't known I was going to have to take." "And how do you think you did?" Bella thought about the question seriously, considering not just the public moment, but the private choice it had represented, the decision to prioritize principles over social comfort, to use her position to protect someone rather than to protect herself. "I think I finally became the person my mother raised me to be," she said finally. "And someone who stands up for people who need standing up for, regardless of the cost." Martha's smile was radiant. "I think your mother would be very proud." As Martha left to join the other departing guests, Bella stood with Alex in the quiet restaurant, surrounded by the remnants of their celebration, but feeling like they were just beginning something entirely new. "So, Mrs. Sterling," Alex said, taking her hands in his, "what happens next?" Bella looked around the room, where they'd celebrated not just their marriage, but their transformation into people worthy of the love they'd claimed to feel. She thought about the children at the community center who were counting on her advocacy, the education fund that was creating opportunities for families across the city, and the life she and Alex could build together based on service rather than status. "The next," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him with all the authenticity and hard-won wisdom of someone who'd finally learned the difference between having a life and living one. "We go home and you together," Alex agreed, and in that word Bella heard not just a promise but a recognition that the woman who'd fired Martha Robinson in a moment of cruel panic was gone forever, replaced by Somi. As they walked out into the Boston night, hand in hand and hearts full of possibility, Isabella Thorne Sterling felt the profound satisfaction of a life finally aligned with its purpose. Not to prove her value through external achievements, but to create value for others through authentic connection and genuine service. She was no longer performing for an audience or trying to earn her place in the world. She was simply living in it, fully and fearlessly, ready to build something beautiful with the man who'd seen through all her carefully constructed defenses to the heart of who she really was. And for the first time in her adult life, that was more than enough. It was everything. 6 months later, Bella stood in the renovated space that would house the expanded Dorchester Community Center, watching as construction workers put the finishing touches on classrooms that would serve twice as many children as the original program. The funding had come through, not just from her education fund, but from a dozen other sources she'd cultivated through months of advocacy and relationship building. Elena ran up to her, now 10 years old and reading 2 grade levels above her peers, her eyes bright with excitement behind her new glasses. "Miss Bella, look!" She held up a certificate declaring her Student of the Month at her elementary school. "Why, my teacher said I'm ready for the gifted program." "Elena, that's incredible." Bella knelt down to the girl's level, her heart swelling with pride that had nothing to do with her own achievements and everything to do with this brilliant child's success. "She also said I should think about becoming a teacher someday," Elena continued, her voice filled with the confidence of someone who'd learned to believe in her own potential. "Like you. You'd make an amazing teacher," Bella said, meaning it completely. Carlos appeared beside them, now 13 and preparing for high school with the kind of academic confidence that would have been impossible to imagine 2 years earlier. "Miss Bella, my mom wanted me to give you this," he said, handing her an envelope with her name written in careful cursive. Inside was a thank you note from Carlos's mother, thanking her for believing in her son when others had given up on him, for fighting for his dreams when he'd been too afraid to fight for them himself. As Bella read the note, Alex appeared beside her, having just finished a meeting with the center's board about expanding their services to include job training for parents. "Good day?" he asked, taking in the construction progress and the children who'd gathered around to share their latest achievements. "The best," she replied, leaning into his warmth as they watched Elena explain the details of her academic award to David and the other children. This was the life she'd built, not perfect, not performed, but real in all the ways that mattered. A life of service and connection, of using her skills and resources to create opportunities for others, rather than just accumulating proof of her own worth. She thought about the woman she'd been 18 months ago, standing in her perfect penthouse and firing Martha Robinson because she'd been afraid that someone might see through her carefully constructed facade. That woman felt like a stranger now, not someone to be ashamed of, but someone to be grateful for because her breakdown had led to this breakthrough. "Ready to go home?" Alex asked as the children began to disperse and the construction crew prepared to close up for the day. "Ready," she said, taking his hand as they walked toward their car. But home now wasn't the perfect penthouse with its designer furniture and harbour views. Home was the brownstone they'd bought in Cambridge, with its comfortable imperfection and the life they were building inside it. Real, authentic, and more beautiful than anything money could buy. As they drove through the city that had witnessed her transformation from performance to authenticity, Bella reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The girl from Medford, who'd been so afraid of not being enough, had finally learned that she'd always been more than enough. She just needed to stop hiding behind the walls she'd built to protect herself. Now she spent her days fighting for children who deserved better than the world had offered them, married to a man who loved her for who she actually was, surrounded by work that felt like calling rather than career. She was no longer the rich bride who'd kicked out the cleaning lady in a moment of cruel panic. She was the woman who'd learned that real wealth came from lifting others up, that true love required complete honesty, and that the most beautiful life was one lived in service to something larger than yourself. And that, Isabella Thorne Sterling knew as Boston glittered around them in the gathering dusk, was more than enough. It was everything she'd never known she wanted, and everything she'd always needed to become complete. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.